in the sense that it's now gone live. I want to remind members about your mobile phones. They have to be turned off. The 3G, 4G connections all have to be turned off, isn't that right? Okay, open the doors wide to the public.
They're flowing in, Chair.
That's right. Okay, so we've had 3 apologies so far. Philip Logan and Catherine Seeley, I think they're concluding that US visit, and Boris Morrow, I think, is in Brussels. So there aren't any other apologies, members. If not, then I'll go straight to chairperson's business. And I want to remind members that the committee had scheduled a PFG, Programme for Government, stakeholder event for the 19th of October, which would be next Wednesday. And this was based on the expectation that the PFG draft departmental action plans would have been issued for public consultation at the start of October. This hasn't happened, so really shortly we'll decide on the date. But we may stick with the date. I want to seek your agreement that if the action plans are issued for consultation this coming Monday, the event will go ahead as planned on Wednesday. If the consultation doesn't happen on Monday, the event will be rescheduled for the 16th of November. Is that agreed, members? Okay, agreed. And where do we see? An informal meeting during the week, in fact just yesterday. I want to remind members that, as previously agreed, I met informally with Professor Peter Finn, the principal of St Mary's University College, and it might be appropriate for me to say that I have a family member attending St Mary's University College. I think you declare interests in all these things, don't you? So, I want to seek your agreement to write to the department regarding the following. Site of the teacher training approved enrolment policy. I suppose mostly the likes of St Mary's or Stranmillis relate to the Department of the Economy, but there are some bits that are connected to education. So first thing we might want is site of the teacher training approved enrolment policy, clarification on the department's policy relating to continuous professional development for teachers, information on the level of demand predicted by the teacher demand model, and the levels of initial teacher education recruitment which the department is to set for 2017 to 2019 for each institution. Does anybody want to comment or add or delete? If not, we'll just agree those actions, members. Thank you. And then Audit Office report. I want to refer you now to the recent report by the Audit Office on the voluntary exit scheme. The report appears to indicate that the application of the VES to inspectors from the Education and Training Inspectorate was limited. The minimum number of professional inspectors required to discharge duties is set out in legislation, and therefore the number of staff permitted to leave was limited. And I'm seeking your agreement to write to DE seeking clarification on this matter.
Yeah.
Rosemary?
Can I raise one matter? Yeah, that voluntary exit scheme, I tried to raise it yesterday afternoon in the oral questions. I'm a bit concerned about it in relation to support for schools when there has been an inspection. And that's nothing to do with inspectors, it's to do with the staff of the EA, education authorities. I know in many areas they've been cut down, not cut down, voluntary exit schemes, so therefore people have left and don't appear to have been replaced or
And what's their role in the process, Rosemary?
Their role in the process would be, say a school has some difficulties, they would come in and advise a school how to perhaps get over these difficulties or steps to take to improve.
Support after the inspection?
Support after the inspection, yeah.
Okay, okay, Carla?
Thank you, Chair. I actually probably would be very supportive of Rosemary's point. I know within the southern board area, the likes of Brent McConville would have been very good at going out and actually helping schools through any sort of difficulties. And I think there is a real lack of people to do that job now.
Yeah. I didn't get an answer.
Yeah.
yesterday in oral questions, and I'd like that.
Would that have been the old CAS team, would it?
Correct.
Aye, the old
Yes,
curriculum
correct.
support
Yes,
team.
curriculum support team. I think that needs to be looked at.
Okay, Peter, do you want to?
No, just to write to the department then in respect of, as members will recall, on the 11th of August when the committee met informally with the Education Authority, they indicated at that time that they had new plans for CAS. Perhaps it's to write to the Education Authority asking what those are.
Please.
Chair, my issue is that, you know, principals are not always trained to deal with the types of things that they're actually being faced with, you know, be it these whole budget cuts and accounts, and, you know, that they're teachers and they're getting faced with a lot of issues. So I think they need external support.
The support for principals.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even that whole thing, it's a different matter, but the lack of CPD, continuous professional development, I think it's been
Yeah.
raised here before as well. Okay, moving on then. This is a late addition to my chairperson's business, but I was speaking to someone yesterday evening from the West Belfast Partnership Board. I think this is something that's attracting everybody's interest. And you tabled an adjournment debate yesterday, Jennifer, and Colin and maybe other members contributed to it. But it appears that they're attracting interest from Bulgarian education inspectors, and that they're hosting a delegation of maybe a dozen or 13 in number inspectors, education inspectors from Bulgaria this incoming week. So if it's with your agreement, I would like to host them for an hour here, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock on Monday. And if any interested member wanted to join in a conversation with the Bulgarian education inspectors and their visit here. Jennifer?
Yeah, no, and I would like to join you in that. I was very interested in the debate yesterday, and I think that one of the things, because I had meetings with the West Belfast Partnership Board as well, they have actually guaranteed a contract now for to do that special education programme throughout Belfast, and I know they're linking in with the like of I think it's North Belfast and then East and that. So I think that even given the contribution, I think it's William Humphreys, is he the West Belfast? Is Clarla, is it William Humphreys? He's North Belfast. Yeah. He was there yesterday, but he was actually saying about, you know, the similar projects that are running in Shankill and that as well. So I think that it's something that seems to be working now right across Belfast, or will be working. And I mean, I would imagine, you know, other sort of areas would be keen to get that, because you know, it's really, it seems to be working, and given the results are going up in those communities. So, you know, I would like to, you know, explore with that. I think it's Hungarian. Is it Bulgarian or Hungarian?
I thought it was Hungarian, then I was told it was Bulgarian.
Hungarian,
So-
is it right?
But anyway, members are free to join us. It'll probably be in this room. But
We'll have to see.
it'll be confirmed. It'll be confirmed if members wish to join in an informal arrangement like that.
Remind us about it.
Aye.
Is that agreed? Yeah.
That's agreed, members. I enjoy always hearing Pat Sheehan use the phrase educational attainment in a polycentric context. What does polycentric mean?
One of those big things you grow things in, isn't it?
I think it's an overarching thing, isn't it?
Possibly. It could be similar.
I think he's enjoying that word. You know, he's used it a few times. If you hear him using it again, just say, you're enjoying that word. Polycentric. We're going well. Okay, I think now we're at item 5 in the agenda. Well, I suppose matters arising. Sorry, I'll go back to the draft minutes first. I want to refer members to the draft minutes, item 3, of the meeting of the 5th of October. That's on page 6 in your pack. And I want to seek your agreement that the minutes are accurate. While you're wondering whether they're accurate or not, I'll sign them. Unless anybody objects.
Agreed then quickly.
Agreed.
No, like, want you to be.
You'd want to be really sharp, Sandra, to spot something in page 4 there. Okay. And matters arising, I'll anticipate that there aren't any matters arising, and we're going to move on to the next item of business, which is the Department of Education presentation, oral evidence regarding special educational needs. And I think we have a 3-member team from the department this morning. Initially, you're all very welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay. And
Yes, we need to sign.
I'm going to welcome the following witnesses. We've got before us members Caroline Gillen, Director of Inclusion and Wellbeing, Sharon Lawler, Head of Special Education and Inclusion Review Team, and Jan Matthews, Special Education and Inclusion Review Team. I want to advise members that the session will be recorded by Hansard, and I will now invite the witnesses to give a short presentation, probably no more than 15 minutes, and then members will get the opportunity to pose questions. Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to provide an update on the SEN review so far and the next steps involved in progressing the new SEN regulations through the draft affirmative resolution process. We've provided members with a briefing paper which sets out the key elements of the new SEN framework and which highlights some of the themes emerging from the consultation on the draft regulations. Before I turn to the draft regulations, we thought it would be helpful just to highlight some key points from the SEND Act 2016, the regulations and the Code of Practice, because each of those elements, along with the capacity building programme, basically make up the overall new SEN framework. Just turning firstly to the Act, the first part of obviously the framework is in place. That's the primary legislation, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act. We refer to it as the SEND Act. So it gained royal assent on the 23rd of March this year. And that Act contains a number of new duties for boards of governors, the Education Authority and the Health and Social Services Authorities, and also provides for new rights for children over compulsory school age and also a number of new rights of appeal. And there's more detail on the Act at paragraph 4 of our briefing paper. So the majority of the provisions of the Act still need to be commenced to bring them into operation. And members will see from paragraph 5 of the briefing paper that we've actually recently commenced section 6 of the Act. This provision reduces the timescale for parents to provide advice to the Education Authority during the statutory assessment process. It was 29 days and section 6 amended it to 22 days. And then importantly, it also allows the authority, with the parent's consent, to proceed with the process as soon as advice is received, rather than having to await the 29 days, which was the previous practice. We chose 22 days as most parents actually do provide advice within that time frame. So hopefully that provision itself will benefit children and parents already, as that will save some valuable time at the start of the process. In terms of the regulations, these regulations will obviously be subject to draft affirmative procedure, and the first stage in the process is obviously engagement with committee members on the responses to the consultation process. I mean, that detailed engagement will really commence at our next appearance before you. Today is really more a summary of where we are at the moment. So for now, I would just highlight a few key provisions in those regulations. Well, the regulations are really a mix of old and new as they build on the 2005 regulations. The new elements of the regulations, though, include further detail on the Learning Support Coordinator, which was previously the SENCO, some detail on the timescales for statutory assessment, that's around reducing the time frame from 26 to 20 weeks. There's detail on the arrangements for the new independent mediation service, and that includes the time limits and qualifications and experience of the mediators, and detail on the content and format of the plan that the Education Authority are going to have to produce, which sets out basically all its arrangements for SEN provision. And then in relation to the child over compulsory school age, there's provision about the capacity of the child and how EA will judge the capacity of the child, and also the assistance and support that a child over compulsory school age may expect to receive so that they can exercise their rights under the new framework. Those are the key points. That's obviously a very quick summary. We will return obviously to the detail in future sessions, and we did provide a link to the consultation document at the bottom of our paper if members want to look at it in further detail. The regulations were subject to public consultation from February to May this year, and in terms of moving forward, well, before we brief you next, we will publish our summary consultation report, and we'll obviously draw members' attention to that when that goes onto the website. And then at the next briefing, we would hope to be providing you with more detail on the actual consultation responses, detail and rationale to any proposed changes that we would be making to the draft regulations on foot of the consultation, and hopefully we'll have also a revised set of regulations which then members we can consider at the next session. Then once the committee's had a chance to consider our draft and do whatever engagement you need to do, we're very happy to come back and answer any questions. And you'll obviously want to offer your own views on any potential amendments before the Minister lays the draft set of regulations before the Assembly for approval next year. On the third element, or the third building block of the framework, is obviously the SEN Code of Practice. The revised code, there already is a code with revisions. There's a consolidated revised code being prepared alongside the regulations. And the Code of Practice is the Department's statutory guidance that those who discharge functions under the SEN legislation must have regard to. The code deals with much more detailed operational issues, such as the procedures to be followed at school-based stages of the framework, the processes for assessment by the authority, the arrangements for drawing up the statement, as well as the annual review, and also arrangements for transition where pupils are leaving school. So it's our intention to have the draft code to be with you before Christmas, and we'll obviously be happy to come along and answer questions that you may have. We've already carried out a good deal of engagement with stakeholders and schools, particularly while we've been developing the code, to take on their views around what it should cover and issues of clarity. But obviously that draft code will be subject to full public consultation next year as well. Finally, the final element, of course, is the capacity building or training that needs to be put in place to effectively implement the new framework. It'll only succeed if it's clearly communicated to boards of governors, staff in schools, EA staff, and relevant health and social services authorities. And also the new rights in particular need to be explained to parents and parents of children who it's intended to support. So we're very conscious of that, because we don't want to fall down at the last hurdle in terms of a proper engagement and training. The EA is going to be responsible for the design and implementation of the training. And we're working with them at the moment around arrangements for that in terms of moving forward. Some capacity building is always ongoing, and some has taken place already around the Certificate of Competence and Educational Testing in schools. That's been rolled out to all schools, known as CCET. But obviously we want to be developing particular training on the framework for all relevant parties. In terms of commencement of the new framework, well, obviously, in order to be fully implemented, all those different elements need to be in place. The Act needs to be commenced, the regulations in the code must be finalised, and the training obviously has to have taken place. We're currently engaging with the EA and other authorities in considering the timing of commencement of the provisions in the Act, and then obviously we're busy working now on the regs and code. So all of that, really, it is a work in progress, but we are aiming for commencement during the 17-18 school year. And we'll obviously keep that under review as we move forward with the finalisation of all the elements. So that's a very quick race through. Hopefully that does set the scene for members, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. Can I just respond briefly and ask one or two questions? Then I'm going to open it up to other members, starting with Sandra. But my first point is, it's a self-evident point maybe, but provision of support to children with special education needs is a crucial part of the educational system and a key indicator of the effectiveness or otherwise of the department. Now, SEN provision doesn't come cheap. The department has recently indicated that this 250 million annual cost has grown every year for the last few years by around £50 million a year. It also is apparent that the nature of the demand for SEN services has changed. For example, a large proportion of the growth in statements is down to better detection of autism. So obviously that's to be welcomed, the better detection, but obviously it presents a great challenge. Now, this has exercised the committee greatly in recent months and weeks, and it would appear that things aren't going very well. There are a very large number of statements which are produced outside statutory timescales. There are statements which are wrong, statements which are imprecise, statements which are the subject of lengthy disputes. Generally comes across as very dissatisfactory. So I suppose the question for the department today is, how is the department and the EA going to meet this challenge? How are you going to manage the resource and financial demands associated with SEN? And are you going to try and reduce the number of statements? Are you going to try and simplify the system? Or are you going to try to do both? So there's opening questions.
Okay, it's a long question.
Commentary on questions.
Absolutely. I mean, well, it is a huge challenge because obviously the numbers of children with special educational needs does appear to be growing, and the variety of needs is growing as well. We as a department, obviously, our remit is to try and set the policy framework and set the context, which then allows the EA to deliver at an operational level. It is the EA in schools who really are in the driving force in terms of identifying those children, assessing and meeting their needs. We feel that the new framework is the step in the right direction. We're obviously trying to increase the duties on schools. We're trying to create greater transparency in terms of what the EA has to offer, and also on a process point reduce the number of levels down to 3 stages of support. On the issue of reduction of statements or not reduction of statements, really what we would like to see, and we're conscious that it is going to all be in the implementation and there will be a bedding-in period, is for children to get those supports at an earlier level, at school-based stages, or perhaps with additional EA support, without parents feeling that they need to push for a statement to somehow cement that support. Because I think if the supports are in there either at an early age or indeed just at an early level that is effective, then the fact that hopefully that will create a satisfaction and the children getting the support they receive, because going down the statementing process in itself creates a lot of bureaucracy and cost. So a lot of cost is even just sucked up by the bureaucracy of statementing. So if we can make the system a lot more responsive at an early stage, then that's to be welcomed. I also think that some of the early intervention work that we're thinking of in the early years service that the EA are going to be developing, if the support can be given to those children at an early stage, then that may then prevent the need for more costly supports at a later stage. It is a huge task to try and reform and move us into the right direction. But even in the EA, obviously the 5 boards coming into a single board, that in itself I think does present an opportunity and eventually, an improvement in terms of the service delivery as well. So there's the policy element, which we feel this is what the framework's about, and then obviously the service delivery element, and the two need to go hand in hand. But we're not under any illusions that it is a huge task.
Just the average cost of an SEN assessment, I think from a recent QUB study launched by the department itself, I think it's down as 6,000 each, and also then there's an annual review of each statement, and that might amount to around £350 each. So it's possible that £12 million every year is spent purely on the SEN statement assessment and review process. And I suppose the question is, does the DE believe that this system is necessary and cost effective?
Well, I think you need an assessment process. I mean, we went out and consulted very heavily on the policy and, at the early stage of this process. And I know there were proposals in the initial stages not to have statements. That was very unpopular. The department obviously has to respond to public opinion and consultation. I think you do need at some point for those children who have much more challenging and substantial needs, there needs to be an assessment process. I don't think we can get away from that. So I think parents and the public would recognise that. Now, the issue of how that assessment process is conducted is obviously that's potentially more a process point, which the EA will want to be considering moving forward. And I know that certainly is on their radar in terms of the assessment and the annual review as to how effectively they can carry that out. But I don't think we can get away from needing assessment, because our process is based on meeting those assessed needs of the child. and that is, the only way to do that is to really take a look at the child's needs and with the right professionals and bring that in.
Okay. Sandra?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation this morning and for anticipation of answering our questions, because there's a lot of concern about this, as I've said that before, about the assessment process. And I think the first thing that I'll raise is in relation to the cost. And I've also heard that the educational psychology workforce complement is only at 63% of full power at the moment within the department. Is that the case? Is there a shortage of, and is that something that...
I don't believe, certainly, I'm not sure where you've got your information, but certainly when we have previously checked, and obviously with our workforce colleagues are in the lead on this in terms of the different elements of the workforce, that's not what we have heard from the Education Authority in terms of gaps in the system. Our understanding was that there were adequate numbers of educational psychologists, and I know the EA, some time ago, this CCET training that I mentioned earlier, that started off as a pilot where we tested different ways of also using educational assistants as well as educational psychology assistants versus educational psychologists. And I do think the EA are looking at some of the results on that to look at, are there different ways of using EdPsychs? Are there ways that actually psychology assistants might be more appropriate for some of the roles in the process? So I think that is under review, but we certainly haven't heard that there's a lack of educational psychologists.
Well, maybe that's something you would look into.
Absolutely.
But I hear what you're saying about reviewing it, and I appreciate that, because I think that's needed. Have you considered making educational psychologists a privatised matter rather than having it within the department? Some people suggest it might be more efficient if that were the case.
Again, I suppose I'm talking outside of my remit. No, I think the EA would certainly see the merit of having an educational psychology service, because that is their go-to service in terms of the needs of the children, and also that then there would be the consistency of opinion, that's offered across the full remit. So that's not something that I believe is being considered, but obviously, that's maybe something for the EA to consider, but I think there would be drawbacks to that as well.
Well, in terms of getting results, in terms of getting returns from educational psychologists, it might shorten timeframes, and you might have more focused responses in terms of educational psychology, depending on the need of the schools. So I think it would be worth investigating and examining that, at least. Has there been any changes this academic year in regards to how a school addresses their educational, the children with special educational needs?
Well, obviously, through the framework, the first change is now from September, this 29 to 22 days. But in terms of from policy level, we haven't introduced any changes, but perhaps at the EA operational level, they're obviously going through that period of bringing things together and regionalisation. So it may be at the school level, due to the EA's regionalisation programme, that they are potentially introducing new processes there to bring everything in a consistent control.
Okay, because I'm hearing a lot of complaints with the excessive amount of paperwork that schools have to complete. They have a 3-page document to complete just to be able to talk to an educational psychologist about a pupil. And really, the teacher knows that in their head without having to write a 3-page document. Then at the next stage, once they receive that paper, then they decide whether they're going to come and talk to the school, and they have another document to fill in, which is really repetitive.
Right.
And it's all physical, handwrite this.
Yeah.
It's so excessive.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot of complaints.
There's
about
obviously
that,
the balance between, you do need the paper trail, especially for later down the line. You do need the paper trail and the information to be captured on a child.
Yeah.
But if there's a balance between, how effective and how efficient it is.
It needs to be, and it all seems to be pen and paper stuff.
Right.
Which is crazy as well, because you would think you could copy and paste something from one document to the next, maybe.
We'll certainly take that back to the EA in terms of what the processes are. It does.
Yeah, well, I think when you're looking at the regs and the code of practice, you know, I'm getting a lot of complaints about what's being implemented this year.
Bottom level,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that'll do me for now. Thanks.
Moving to Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. The Minister issued a press statement recently, I believe, to announce the reduction in the target time for the issue of special educational needs statements from 26 weeks to 22 weeks. Is that correct?
Well, what you'll see in the paper is one of the themes that was coming through. The regs at the moment, or the overall framework, we were proposing a reduction from 26 to 20 weeks, and that reduction was going to be made up of a number of elements, you know, shaving times of different elements, you know, to the process. You know, the time taken for the consideration of whether you were going to make a statement, to the conducting the statutory assessment, to issuing of the statement. One of the themes coming through from the consultation quite strongly was our proposal to reduce the time frame for health advice to be received. We wanted to reduce that from the existing 6 weeks down to 4 weeks. That was looking like it's being pretty problematic in terms of the health system, and whether that was really achievable. If we decided to go back to the 6 weeks for health, then that would have a knock-on impact, and it would mean we probably would only be able to reduce the overall time frame to 22 rather than the 20. So that's obviously something that we haven't gone to the Minister yet in terms of how he wants to respond to that, and we'll obviously be interested to hear committee views. The previous committee, when we were talking about the timescales and health and education, appeared before the committee, I know one of the questions was asking, well, look, given that health are constantly breaching the then 6 weeks, even that was asked, is that a realistic timescale? So we realised that the proposal for 4 weeks was pretty challenging. So that's maybe what that relates to, and that's still to be determined.
I'm trying to find the press release and I can't find it.
Was it maybe in an assembly or orals or something?
I'm pretty sure it got pretty wide coverage in the daily newspapers as well, that the process was being shortened, which would obviously be extremely encouraging to lots of people.
That's right. But the press release was, the recent press release was around that 29 to 22 days for parental information, and then allowing the EA
Maybe
to
I'll try
move
and
ahead.
find it and come back to you.
Sure.
I suppose the wider question is, regardless of what the targets are, my understanding is that in 2013-14 around 60% of SEN target times were issued outside of that time frame. So what is the current percentage that are outside of that target time, and can you give us an idea of the scale of the problem of that?
I don't have the most up-to-date ones, but we'll certainly come back to you on that. I think that's right. There was a large percentage, and a lot of that percentage was down to the health advice. Health is one of the permitted exceptions, where you can breach the timescale, and so that did impact on the percentages quite a bit, and that's certainly an area that we know with health that we're actually working on in terms of trying to look at ways of streamlining that process, of making it easier for the EA to request the advice, and likewise for health to get it back. So we're conscious that is a weak point in the system that we're trying to do something about.
And who's held accountable for that delay?
Well, the delay, I suppose, is permitted under the legislation from the health perspective, but...
Well, what is a valid exception then? Help us understand that.
Valid exception is, say, where the information comes late from the parent or the school, or there's a delay in the health, or there's incomplete information. So it is set out in the existing legislation. We can certainly clarify it for you, but... yeah, the valid exceptions, so they're set out in the regulations. Further advice is being sought. There's late advice from parents. There's delay in health advice. There's delay due to school closure or holidays, or appointments not being kept. And the most frequent of those valid exceptions is the delay in the health advice.
Okay, because I mean, if there's as many as 60% of statements aren't making those targets, I suppose that seems like a significant problem, Chair. Maybe something for us to look at in a bit more detail. Thank you for your response. Thank you, Chair.
Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I have to say, I'm quite shocked at you saying that you weren't aware about the shortage of educational psychologists, because in the number of years that I have been working with constituents, that's one of the main reasons given to me for the delay in statements. So, and I'm not saying, but
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised when you made that statement there.
I mean, it has been raised quite frequently, obviously in assembly questions, and I don't know whether the issue is around, schools obviously have to prioritise children. They're the first port of call in terms of prioritising the children who would be referred to educational psychology, and then that maybe creates a delay at constituents level. But certainly when we approach the EA, or whenever we're considering the issue, and the advice from the EA that there is not a current shortage. But
certainly wasn't the case
we will definitely
when I was dealing with
we'll definitely check that.
The education levy boards then, or the EA came into being, because that was one of the main reasons given to me when I was asking, about the delay. I'm just saying, I was just surprised.
I do know, just on the educational psychology point, the EA, some time ago, it used to be the educational psychologists were also effectively the gatekeepers for some of the stage 3 supports, the supports that were not full statementing but other supports from the EA. And I know the EA have recently looked at other ways for children to access those stage 3 supports without having to go through educational psychologists. So it's trying to free up the system to keep the educational psychologists for the...
And I agree with that. Through the chair, I think that really, the difficulty is it's the only way parents can get help and support at the moment. And it has been the only way that parents could access help and support for their children, is by going through that process,
and that's,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the delay in that process, actually, in my opinion, was disgraceful, because a lot of children that needed that help and support didn't get it maybe until a year, maybe sometimes even 2 years later. And obviously we're into early intervention and education, but I'm just making that as
and that's
a point.
why we'd like the
so that's why I'm glad to hear the new framework is looking at that. Can I just ask, because again, I think that this whole statement process, the problems with it has been, really, really complex, and I think that for parents, particularly, to have any faith, if you like, that there are going to be changes made. You mentioned there it's going from 26 weeks to 22 weeks. That's not, and that's still quite a long time for someone, and that's only waiting until they get assessed, and then the process then of the help and the support. It seems to me that if there's an identified need there, that that support needs to be put in place at a much earlier in a much earlier time frame. So I think that needs to be looked at, the time frame, even in terms of that.
Well, what I would say is, statementing is sort of the end of the process, if you like, for those children who really need it. We can't forget about the supports that schools should be putting in place, and also the stage 3, the current stage 3 supports, which is the support between school and EA. So it's not that you have a scenario where there's literally nothing and then you go straight to statement. So, there should be a continuum and a gradual increase and identification. So it's only those that are identified as needing the additional support. So there shouldn't be nothing.
What you're saying, but by the same token, the moderate learning units that are there in some schools couldn't get funded either. So, even those supports before it gets to that stage, sometimes schools struggle to get those, the resources for them as well. And I'm talking about schools here that don't have the money to put them in place themselves, and maybe have a high percentage of children coming through that need that special attention. We see it now in the nurture units, and how that is actually helping and developing and helping with the children. But again, they're not in every school. So till we get to the stage where those supports are there, and there are some schools that are really struggling because of the high amount of children they even have with moderate learning difficulties. So they have to give that extra sort of support there for those children, and then you have the children that need the one-to-one. So, I'm just making that point here, because to me the system needs an overhauling. It really in terms of that. And I just want to then ask a question in and around the children with the complex needs, special needs schools, because again, and you know, something that has been brought to my attention as well. See, in terms of, obviously we had the whole debacle where the school hours were cut for parents, and how particularly parents that had, you know, were children with complex needs, and how that impacted on the child and how it impacted on the family life and everything, whether their hours were getting cut by half, and half the times they had to travel to a particular school. And yet we heard that there were places in particular special needs schools. And we also had the case of Fleming Fulton that you know, made a very good case here to actually, where the Education Authority had taken away provision. You know, and now I'm hearing, and I just want to get this clarified, is it the case that a child who has complex needs for nursery provision and, you know, has to go to a special needs school, it's very, very clear they have to go to a special needs school, do they have to be statemented first before they can go into that school, or can they go to the school and then, you know, the process start? Because again, there are parents getting caught up in this, that they're being told they don't have to have that statement first, that process can run alongside, and yet when they go to put their children, you know, to access the places for their children, they're then told they have to be in the school.
That's a key question. Obviously,
Yes.
some children are at home today
Yeah.
because they're not being admitted to school awaiting this process.
Well, I think previously, where maybe the confusion has arisen, I think previously there was different practices going on with maybe children getting in through early years panels, some sort of panels. Other times, principals would be children would be approaching the school, and then obviously the children who would be statemented. The legislation is very clear. For a child to be in a special school, they need to have gone through the statutory assessment process. There is an exception where, in exceptional circumstances, if the child is in the process of being assessed, in exceptional circumstances they may be placed. Not wanting to preempt the Minister later on, but I think you know, this view that there are spaces in special schools, and why are they not just being filled up? I mean, the EA, I think, wrote to you just recently, I think there's maybe, say, 250 children were placed this year. There's still at least another 50 children in the statementing process at the moment. So although some schools may say, oh, we have spaces, they are maybe not aware of those children actually coming through the system and who will be actually arriving with them this school year. So I think maybe there had been maybe some confusion previously, but the legislation is clear around, you know, really children in special schools should be there because it's on the basis of their assessed need and unfit of a statement.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, no, just to clarify for my own, you're saying this school year, the school year started in September. So how could they be waiting in this school year for children to be placed?
Well, some children maybe they have only been identified quite recently. Maybe they've been referred from health. Maybe they've, you know, they could have been in a different setting, and the setting has felt that, you know, that actually these children have more complex needs. It could be a variety of reasons. It could be children moving into the jurisdiction. So there could be a variety of reasons as to why, you know, the system, the various statementing processes are at different stages for different children.
Yeah, and I know, and I'm just trying to tease this out, because what about a child who has very clearly been, you know, told, or a parent that has been very clearly told, you know, yes, your child will be put in this particular setting, and, you know, was given information to say that, you know, in them exceptional circumstances that you mentioned there, that they could go to the school, and then the statement process or the assessment process take place within, or the statement process when they're in the school. Now being told that they can't now go to the school until March or you know, next year.
I wonder. I'm not sure. It sounds like a communication issue. I'm not sure who would have told the parents that their child needs those. Was that? Obviously, it's hard to talk about particular.
Within the, you know, I mean,
within the
parents have been with the Education Authority and everything else, and that was what they were told. So you're saying it was really
sounds like it's maybe a communication issue. But what I would say in terms of the early years in particular, although there will be children going through the statementing process, and obviously you want that to move as fast as possible and to get them into the special school system if that's what they need, the EA does have other early years supports out there, which maybe involve going to the child's home or engaging with the parent, or some peripatetic teachers going out to the child's home, whether if it's visual impairment. So, you know, there is an ability, rather than the child just sitting at home with no support, the EA does have services there that they will engage with the parents and help support the child even in that interim period. Or it may be that the child is in a different setting for the time being and is getting supported at that setting. But obviously it very much turns on particular cases, and I wouldn't like to comment on a particular case if you've got one in your head.
I'm just trying to get some clarity in the way the process works, and you know, the legislation and how it is.
But the placements at special schools, even in exceptional circumstances where a child has to go in while he or she is being assessed, that's still in the control of the EA. That's not for other individual, you know, for schools to basically give places out, because obviously the EA has the perspective of the overall needs and the children in their system. So it would always be through the EA.
Okay, thank you.
Carla?
Thank you, and can I thank representing the committee? Caroline, it seems like we'll be charging you rent. There's a couple of points. I suppose I want to just impress upon the ones you're all presenting today. This is a massive issue out on the ground. I cannot explain to you just how emotive this is, and parents are at their wits' end. Parents, I have sat with groups of parents literally crying because of the way in which the system, I believe, has failed them. They find themselves in a situation where they have a child who has presented with autism or ADHD or Asperger's or any of those additional needs. And you would think at this stage of the game, we would be in a well enough position or a good enough position to be able to guide and help those parents through each step of the way. And I honestly don't think we're any further forward than what we've ever been. But that's probably my rant on it, and I don't know if other members have found that to be the same, but it has been my experience. The referral system, and you mentioned about the educational psychologists, that is a major issue on the ground, that there's not enough of them. The other major issue is that there is a time allocation model where each school only gets 10 hours or 5 hours or whatever allocated to them on some formula. Now, that means that a teacher is having to make a decision, you know what, here's 3 this year, we'll put through, and I'm going to have to leave wee Jimmy to next year because I don't have enough time in my allocation for him to be seen. I think that's wrong. I really, really do. And I think that time allocation model needs looked at, reviewed and changed as soon as possible.
Doesn't sound pupil-centred, does it?
It certainly doesn't. Also, it used to be that there was a relationship between the educational psychologists and the teachers where they could actually have a conversation and say, look, I think there's an issue here, maybe presenting. What do you think? That's gone. It's all now totally and utterly paper-based. And they're burdened down with paper. So that is another issue. I think the training, I think your soundings are excellent around training and provision of training. Well, certainly the questions that I have asked the Minister, asked of the department, you know, there are great soundings made that training is happening out on the ground. Certainly any of the schools that I have went to visit, they're not able to access it. And number 2, it talks about that the school identifies the training that is needed. You know, should we as a department or as the EA not be enforcing training on teachers and classroom assistants because of the needs that are out there? I would like to know a wee bit more around the funding of this overall strategy and how much funding will be allocated towards the implementation of it. It's something I feel very passionate about, so you know, I'm not in any way shooting the messenger, but I would like just a wee bit more detail around the funding of it, and just a wee bit more detail as to when the rollout.
Yeah.
And also, have you spoken to parents in the design?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of your initial point about even the information and advice about getting your way through the system, I mean, that was something that did come out in the earlier consultation, and hence we have particular provisions about an advice and information service that we're requiring the EA to operate. Also, the Education Authority plan that I referred to earlier, that is another effort to introduce transparency in that the Education Authority have to set out clearly for everybody what are the services that they offer in relation to special educational needs. So that will be much more clearly communicated. On the training point and asking schools to identify training, well, we feel, schools are best placed to determine the training needs of their teachers vis-a-vis the pupils and the pupils in their school. We had done some previous training with classroom assistants, I think.
That's right. Part of the EA did Synco leadership and management training, and that included in terms of the better use of classroom assistants for the benefit of children.
But I'd be concerned around, if schools aren't able to access it, if they've identified a need and aren't able to access training, obviously we can pick that up separately. In terms of the funding, a lot of this is around the system doing things better, so arguably shouldn't require additional funding, but maybe using existing funding differently. There is obviously a funding issue in relation to the new the Enhanced Dispute Avoidance and Resolution Service, the DARS. We're insisting on that being independent, and then the introduction of a mediation service. So there will be a requirement to fund that in terms of getting it up and running, and then ongoing maintenance of it. That's likely to be tendered by the EA. Because it has to be independent of the EA. The capacity building, we already have just over 500,000 for capacity building this year. That may need to be ramped up. All of these just we need to scope that out. But the preparation of the capacity building and some of the rollout will happen this year. We had money set aside for that. And then obviously there'll be some additional money for Sendist, because there's a knock-on effect on them in terms of the young people over compulsory school age being able to take Sendist cases and appeals. So there's some extra costs there. But a lot of the other issues are really more around the system doing things, changing their processes, taking into account the views of the child more effectively, producing their plan and making it more transparent, enhanced duties with health and education, and that's around doing things differently. As regards speaking to parents, Jan or Sharon will be able to say, but yes, there's been good engagement with parents groups and indeed other groups. Do you want to say?
Right, yes. We did obviously on the regulations, we did the public consultation, but while that was running, that was a web-based consultation for people to respond. We also did meetings with groups, we went out to children and young people. It was facilitated by an organisation called Participation Network. So I attended most of those meetings with children, and also there was a parents meeting where we basically explained what we were proposing with the regulations and got their views. We got very clear views on some of the things that they thought would work and some of the things that they thought wouldn't work and needed attention. When we are completing and giving you the consultation response document, you'll see that fleshed out in more detail, and then when we come to speak to you next time, we'll be explaining the changes that we have been listening to what parents, for example, one of the things I remember parents saying to us about the regulations was in terms of the mediation and the timescales that they had. They felt that they were impractical and would put them under further stress, etc. So, we are listening. That's just one example. There was a whole lot of other areas.
What the other thing we're going to do, once we get the code of practice tied down, we are intending to develop a parents' guide. Just in terms of a guide through the system, and because I think again there are some very good websites out there, but I think it would be useful to have a helpful guide for parents, because that it is an overwhelming process.
And a children's guide for children over 16, because they're going to have new rights and the new framework, so they have to be explained to them as well.
Just a couple of points just to come back. In terms of the training, does that come out of school budgets?
Well, we have a budget for the development of the training. What we had also asked schools to do was to set aside one of their school development days this year for for training for their staff.
Maybe that's
training
the
would be-
issue, that they're having to use some of their budget for the training. I don't know what way the system works.
Not for ours. Not for
No.
ours. But I mean, I assume some of the school budgets should be used for training. That sounds to me like the right thing to do, but not in relation to the SEN framework yet. So,
But in terms of the school budget, you know the situation with the
yeah.
school budgets and how common they are. What degree has, isn't it Dr. Claire Mangan is over this
yes,
area
she's the
in-
Children Young People Services Director.
And has she been involved in...
We have been engaging with the EA and particularly Dr. Mangan, because obviously this is her area and in terms of the operational delivery. So absolutely, we've had regular engagement. In fact, we will continue to do so around the development of the training.
And you were able to get her okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's important as well that the actual operational staff in the EA have been working with us as
Absolutely.
well in relation to both the regulations and the code as well. So it's key that we have those frontline.
I think, apologies, I'm just going to come back one more time. I think a big issue is for the likes of Dr. Mangan. Dr. Mangan needs to come out and hear the issues from parents. And I would make that point. I don't know if the department can do anything to help with that. But Dr. Mangan needs to come out of her offices and come down onto the ground and actually hear what the issues are on the ground.
But sure, to quote her back from her own words, parents aren't best placed to understand the issues and needs of children, and they're her own words from whenever she was here
Herein
recently.
lies the
So
problem.
maybe that wouldn't be.
Okay, haven't got the ministerial delegation yet. We're very happy to carry on here. And we have two more listed members. Chris, I think you want back in at the end, but I'll go to Rosemary first, if you don't mind. Rosemary, Colin, then Chris.
No. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Couple of things. You talked about going through the various stages in identifying children, and you talked about schools should put in place various things in relation to education plans. Are you aware that perhaps a classroom of 20, 25 children could have 6, 8, 10 different educational plans in them? And my goodness, that for one teacher taking a class, that is a horrendous amount of work to ask from an individual teacher. And I wonder, is any consideration being given to perhaps, you talk about schools struggling, sometimes teachers are struggling and struggling very much. Has any consideration been given to perhaps supporting teachers that may have quite a lot of pupils, a great percentage of their pupils in their classrooms needing special education plans? We have an excess of teachers out there, unemployed teachers. What about bringing in extra teaching staff to support the teacher already in the classroom? Has that been thought of? That's one issue. Another issue is, I want to go back to the interagency work. How will you, working with the health service, I want to know how you will ensure that working with the other body, with the health agency, health services, will not hold up identification or assessment. I think that there, we haven't got an answer to that. Yes, we need to work with them, but we've sat and listened today to the hold-ups in relation to it. What steps are you going to put into place that this will not happen with the new SENDO regulations? And last, how do you what way are you going to measure that the new SENDO framework that you're putting in place will deliver better outcomes, and how will those be measured? Those three.
Yeah, sure. On the education plans, I mean, obviously that was a proposal as part of the new framework. I mean, we need to, the feedback in terms of the policy was that for those children with SEN, on the SEN register, there needed to be an attention around setting targets for those children and developing them. So we have to balance. We do need that to focus and improve the outcomes for children, which you've mentioned at the last point. We are very conscious, obviously, that does create a burden for teachers. We think it's a justifiable burden. But I mean, Jan, that's all going to be included.
We hope to put that in the code, or we set out clearly in terms of what should be put in a personal learning plan for the benefit of the child in order to address their learning difficulty. We don't want to create a whole bureaucratic machine, but it is clear that teachers want to identify what it supports that they need to put in place by way of reasonable adjustments and also relevant and purposeful measures for children in school to try and achieve the desired outcome in terms of their access to the curriculum. So we do need a tool, which is the personal learning plan. But as I say, we want to try and make it as least bureaucratic as possible. But it's also important that for the personal learning plan, because in particular, child transferring from one setting to another, that there has to be a means of the school being able to share with the consent what they've done for a child already, so that a new school is at a good starting point. They know what has worked for a child and what hasn't worked.
And also the the fact that the parents are involved in the development of it. So it very much links into how do you know that the system is supporting the child and the child is progressing. But obviously, I don't believe that we would be able to justify employing additional teachers to, obviously given the budgetary position, I don't believe that's likely to be moving, a goer moving forward. In terms of the health and education work, we had already, even separate to this framework, we had already identified a need to sit down with health to try and improve the processes around the interfaces between health and education. And we had set up a sort of a working group last year to get the key people from the trusts and the Health and Social Care Board and the EA and ourselves around the table. We formalised that, and Jan's actually leading on a project around looking at actually sometimes quite straightforward ways of improving the system to make it, the information flow a bit more clearly. Maybe you want to say a few words on that?
What we're looking at, the group that Caroline's talking about had already identified, and this is the community paediatricians working together, had already identified we need to have a streamlined process which allows us to quickly assess and identify the reports to give back to the Education Authority by way of the statementing process. So, for example, a very practical thing, let's use electronic interface of encrypted data between the two. Let's make sure that we have the right information in terms of sharing information between the EA and the trust to allow them to quickly identify the child's concern. And also, what pathway could the trust actually develop that would be streamlined across the trust, because that's important too, with operating five different trusts. So that's work that has already been done. From the Education Authority point of view, I've been dealing with a number of representatives there, and they too are looking at, well, we could provide this information in a different way. And so that's all important, and that's a here and now thing, that we don't have to wait to a new framework.
Yeah, we're clear that we want to keep moving ahead with that rather than wait, a new framework, because that's just about improving the system. Absolutely. So we've already started that work. And in terms of judging the success of the framework, well, obviously, there's the department does use sort of overall framework of looking at how effectively schools are delivering. Also, issues around the system-wide, where the department's doing some system-wide evaluation about how it might evaluate the overall system. We are conscious that in relation to pupils with special educational needs, especially those who have the more severe learning difficulties, that using the GCSEs, the 5+ GCSEs, isn't really the right route to go. Although actually the outcomes, the educational attainment outcomes for pupils with SEN, including those with statements, has been steadily improving over the last 10 years. We would like to do a bit of work around looking at other levels of progression and other ways of measuring for those children who aren't doing the 5+ GCSEs, other ways of measuring that. But there's different elements to it, which might include inspection, might include looking at attainment and other issues like that. So.
Just
Rosemary, mate, just
one.
Okay, no
one-
problem. Minister
just-
in the delegation
yes,
just wants
sir.
to come in, but carry on.
Just one more.
Rosemary, I'm going to give way to you.
Thank you. Just one thing. I am very, very disappointed in your response to the support of teachers in relation to teachers that have a large number of perhaps pupils that have specific needs within education plans. Some of them do have, these children do have classroom assistants. A lot of them do not. They're only at stage 1, 2 or 3. They do not. And I'm very, very disappointed. You talk about effective schools effectively delivering. You're not going to have effective delivery if you're going to have the teacher constantly off sick with overburdening work. And don't forget there are other children in that classroom that also have to be brought forward. And the teacher is running ragged between 2 or 3 two children of different needs.
Can we pick that up at 12:30?
Yeah, okay.
Thank
I
you,
think
Rosemary.
this must be addressed somehow.
I think we were trying to say that we're wanting to try and make it as burden-free as possible, balancing the needs of the child, but happy to pick it up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for now, Sharon and Jan, thanks. You're going to rejoin us at some point.
Okay.
Thank you. So, members, we're going to go to item 6 now. Caroline remains and is going to be joined by David Hughes and, of course, the Minister.
Chair, can I just suggest a few actions further to that, if that's okay? Are you doing this later? Will everybody be here?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. It's kind of understood that we're going
this is
to
good,
need to
given
take
how much
ministerial
we're paying
delegation.
for it.
Okay, welcome, Minister. And David, thank you. And Caroline, of course. Okay. Okay, members. Minister, how dare you arrive in the middle of Rosemary's question?
Which I would get a level of chagrin.
Okay. Obviously, as a committee, we very much welcome ministerial briefings. And at this point, I want to refer members to briefing papers beginning at page 43 in your pack. And a tabled item of previously considered correspondence. And there's going to be 2 aspects to this ministerial presentation. Oral evidence regarding preschool special school review and the whole business of post-primary transfer. So with that, I just formally welcome Minister Peter Weir, Caroline Gillen, who is Director of Inclusion and Wellbeing, and David Hughes, Director of Curriculum Qualifications and Standards. And I want to advise members that the session is being recorded by Hansard. So with that, Minister, I'll hand over to you straight away for a presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and make my presentation reasonably short to allow the maximum opportunity. As members know, I thank members for accommodating me because I have another appointment which I can't get out of later on today on it, which I'll need to be away for. I apologise also in advance that I've still got a little bit of a cold, so my voice may be a little bit indistinct today, so members will probably notice no difference whatsoever to a usual level of performance in that regard. Can I thank the Chair and Committee members for this opportunity to update you, I suppose, on the 2 aspects that have been raised. Obviously, members will be very much aware, no need to tell you, that there are a wide range of particular issues which are happening within education. And I suppose these are 2 very important issues, but 2 amongst many in that regard. So I suppose there is a wider context in terms of that, but I'll not particularly dwell on the wider context, and maybe to be helpful to the committee, get down into the nitty-gritty of the 2 issues. If I can turn first of all, I suppose, to the preschool provision in terms of special schools. The Education Authority's, I suppose, looking at the Education Authority's strategic review of preschool provision in special schools. Now, obviously, the aim of that review is to develop a model of high quality early years education for preschool children who require specialist provision, and it's most particularly to try and do that in a strategic fashion. I think there has been rightly a level of criticism at times that there's been a certain reactive quality. So part of this is to try and scope ahead in a much more organised and strategic manner. Obviously, directly, the placement of children in special school nursery provision through the process is a matter directly for the authority, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a great level of interest within the department within that. It's therefore, I think, essential that as the authority, and particularly as individual officers within the authority will be making that placement, It's important that, very specifically, the EA Chair and the Board provide effective oversight of this piece of work. And that's a point that I emphasised at a very early meeting when I took up the post with both the Chair and the Chief Executive of the EA. It's important that the processes are got right to try to ensure that we get the best possible result. To that regard, in terms of some of the process that has been put in place, I welcome that a subgroup of the EA Board members will have specific oversight of the delivery of that review, and that, given the particular nature of this work, that the authority has appointed a project manager to support the delivery of the work. I've also asked my officials to closely monitor progress and to provide me with regular updates. So while in one sense it is work directly for the EA, we will at least be keeping a very close eye on what's going on. I would very much acknowledge members' concern regarding how some of the elements of the review in terms of the initial stages that have been handled to date. I know, to be fair, going back to my predecessor, there was initially an announcement which then led to the review, and I know that my predecessor had raised concerns, which I think in the previous guise as chair of the committee had also raised, which led to this being done in a much more strategic way. And it has to be said that some of the handling that's happened by the EA up until now has not been of the best possible nature. But I suppose with all of us, it's a question then, well, it's important that the EA is held to account for that. It's also important that we do ensure that we move on to try to ensure that we get the best possible result. I'm aware, and particularly as regards consultation, that the EA has indicated to the Education Committee its determination to improve the quality of its consultation. Now, there obviously have been concerns raised about the issue of engagement, and as such, I've received assurances from the EA that there will be meaningful engagement with those directly affected by the review, which will include, I suppose, at different levels, the principals of the special schools themselves, the professional practitioners, and parents and other stakeholders, all of which have a crucial role within this. An engagement strategy of the review outlining the arrangements for participation in the stakeholder groups has been developed by the EA. Quite probably it's to be considered by the EA board members, but I'm sure that they'll be sharing that with the committee in the near future. The draft report and recommendations will be subject to full public consultation, and I can assure members that there'll be no long-term decision on the matter of the review. It will be made prior to the completion of the EA review. It has to be sequenced right and has to be done properly in that regard. Turning to the other issue of, and I'll be happy, Chairman, if we come to take questions of whatever, obviously it matters yourselves what way you want to structure the questions side of it. But maybe just in the opening remarks also turn to the post-primary transfer. The revised guidance, which was issued on the 7th of September, endorses current departmental policy of academic selection in grammar schools and recognises the benefits of children of an academically selective system. Part of its purpose was to remove any perceived threat to primary schools involved in supporting children through the process of transfer. It's important to realise that this is about reducing the pressure on schools, or not increasing it, or indeed reaching a situation where we are in any way officially turning a blind eye to what we know was already happening within a lot of schools. My intention is to make it clear to schools, parents and children that teachers can prepare children for the transfer test if they so wish, and we can get into some of the detail of that. It's, in that sense, it is permissive in that nature, nothing more, nothing less. I've been very clear about my own views in terms of selection, and I believe that every child, regardless of background, postcode, social group, religion or ethnicity, should have the opportunity to be educated in a grammar school if they so desire. I also recognise the excellent work that's going on in our non-selected post-primary schools and the significant contribution that they make to the social and economic prosperity of Northern Ireland. It's an overall package of education that's delivered in Northern Ireland that has produced some of the successes that we've had. The revised guidance supports the continued rights of schools to use academic selection as a means of entry criteria. I also, in addition to the guidance, want to improve the current process, and have asked my officials to work with the two current providers to establish what might be possible. That work is at a very early stage, and at this stage I don't think there's anything particularly to report, but I'll be happy to come back to the committee whenever there's something a bit more concrete on that element of things. And as soon as there is anything to report, as I said, we'll indicate. So, I mean, I'm happy to go into the detail of either of those, but I'm happy to respond to whatever questions they...
Okay, thank you. Minister, obviously we're going to deal with preschool special school review questions first.
That's fine, that's fine.
But can I just say again, we take this very seriously. The idea that the Minister would come before the committee, and it's very helpful. You yourself, Minister, as a Minister in recent weeks and months, have visited a number of special schools, and I think as a committee member you'll have visited Glenveigh. We visited Torbank, and people do appreciate the excellent work that takes place in those schools and the professionalism of the staff. But suppose to come to the main point, this committee has been less than impressed by the Education Authority's management of admissions to special school preschool provision, and a very difficult issue. We feel as a committee, I think, if I was to interpret the mood of the committee correctly, that some of the statements coming from the EA were misleading, that timescales seemed to change and lengthen unexpectedly, and we detected a surprising degree of reluctance by the Education Authority to engage in consultation with key stakeholders, and that has made our job of scrutiny more difficult, unnecessarily difficult. And we discover now that the EA may have overestimated the demand for preschool special school places. And really what I'm saying is, Minister, is this your understanding, and has the Education Authority got it badly wrong? And have you, as a Minister and a department, have you had a very unsatisfactory experience of getting to grips with this?
Well, look, I think from the point of view, look, there is a key challenge that is out there. One of the issues, particularly with dealing with provision in terms of special needs, is that it has been very much a movable target in that regard. Now, I think it's of value that we have a situation where, because one of the constant and rightly complaints that has been made in terms of provision has been that we don't always have had the greatest level of early identification of problems that require then intervention through a statement through special educational needs. Now, in the long run, there's clearly, and there's work ongoing to try to ensure there's cooperation between education and health, and there's still problems to be ironed out. What we do seem to have a situation is that within the system, there's both a greater identification and an earlier identification, and particularly where that impacts in is then on being able to assess entirely accurately at any one particular point precisely how many children will need nursery places. Because if you're identifying that in an earlier stage where there's a requirement in relation to that, the figures in terms of, and this is where I think we've got to be careful with the figures. Mention was made. You mentioned about the numbers that are in this year, and there was an estimate in terms of the impact of roughly about a 20% increase on that. I think the position has been that as of the 1st of September, there was around about 280 or 290 that had been directly placed and had been identified. There are currently, because I think we'd estimated that it would end up around about 340, 350 as a figure.
365.
365. Well, I know at the moment, in terms of directly speaking, there's at least 50 children are currently in process because they've been identified a little bit later in the day in relation to that.
Total of 330.
Well, I'm saying at least. You know, what is the position this morning may not necessarily be the position by the end of the week in that regard, because I think the idea is to try and have that early identification as possible. Obviously, one of the issues, I think a lot of the children that are now getting identified and potentially, for instance, even be identified in year, would have been children that maybe 5 years ago would either not have been identified or maybe wouldn't have been identified until some stage in primary school. So there's an earlier bit, but it also means that the totals are likely to be more rolling on that basis on it. So we are aware, therefore, at least then of 330 as a minimum that will be there within this year. As with any statementing process, there's a statutory assessment process. In the vast bulk of cases, that leads then directly to a statement. There can be situations where there has maybe been an assessment that doesn't necessarily lead to that, or indeed there's maybe been some degree of wrong identification. But that figure, in that sense, is moving, and I think it was important that there was some level of preparation in relation to that. In terms of some of the other aspects you mentioned, there's a very clear and definitive timetable that has been put out in relation to this now. Remembering back in terms of what the initial timetable was whenever I was chair of the committee, the important thing, I mean, look, there were, I think, very valid criticisms that have been made in terms of lack of consultation, and I think, well, it's ultimately up to the EA to answer in terms of their precise rollout of this on it. Part of the reason why things are taking longer on that basis, and therefore the targets or the commencement will be for September 17, is to ensure that we have proper processes of consultation, proper processes of engagement. May be helpful in terms of, from a timetabling point of view, to indicate work, as I said, is started on this. The aim would be to have a draft report and recommendations when the EA going to the EA board by January of 2017. Once, and if that is accepted by the board, it will then go out to an 8-week public consultation. It will come down to some of the more specific consultation that will need to take place as well. That would lead then to a final report and recommendations to the EA board of March 2017 and a submission to the department by the end of March 17 with an implementation plan, which would then, due to commencement of implementation in September 17 and full implementation during that year. Now, in terms of specifics of consultation, I think there's importance both that there is professional input to that. You know, I think while consultation in terms of once a draft is produced, it is actually better that they try and get the draft right in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so consequently we have an overall sort of flow in relation to that. In terms of pre-consultation, I suppose there are, as well as general research that will be commissioned and indeed the work that will happen by the way of the subgroup, I suppose in particular there are two, I think, key groups that they will be establishing. One is a professional practitioners group involving those particularly in education and health to make sure that what is there is fit for purpose. But also then that a parental group is established, which can then be a pre-consultation group as well on that basis. So that will be at a situation before they even get to the draft. Now, clearly by definition, whenever a draft report is produced and goes out to public consultation, that will also provide a wider consultation as well. So it's trying to provide that degree of belt and braces. And I think that in many ways is to respond to some of the mistakes that have been made in the past in terms of consultation, to try to make sure that what we have is actually fit for purpose, and we'll be monitoring that to make sure that happens.
Okay. I think you'll be aware, Minister, that in the last mandate, the Special Schools Leadership Forum called for a single database for special needs school children, and that the EA could perhaps have learned from that, something that they're learning now.
Well, Chair, I mean, I suppose as part of that, I have a colleague of mine who talks about sometimes that every day is a school day in that regard, and I think learning experiences are not something that simply are restricted to our time in the classroom and that basis on it. Yes, I think to some extent, because of some of the mistakes in the past, I think the processes which have been put in place by the EA, to be fair to them, are showing some at least indications of learning from previous mistakes in that regard. I think it is important because while it's right that people are held to account and right they're criticised where actions have been done wrong, it's actually the corrective actions that they take to ensure that doesn't go into the future that I think is the most important aspect, to make sure that we're not simply repeating some of the problems that have happened in the past. And I think with a very detailed process and implementation plan that has been put in place. Now, I can't prejudge what the outcome of any report is going to be, and it would be wrong of me to do so. But I think at least in terms of the processes, there has clearly been an effort to try and ensure some of the mistakes that were made are then corrected at this stage and are not simply being repeated into the future. Okay,
and another key question from my point of view is this, and I'm going to come to Chris next, is can the Minister advise if all children who require a preschool place in a special school did manage to secure such a place in September 2016, this school year?
As I understand it, of those who had been identified prior to that point, the issue, and this is where the point I'm making in relation to this is, there are quite a number, and if there's individual cases, I'm sure they can be looked at in that regard. The concern, I think, particularly that's being raised, and this is where it will be difficult always to get it absolutely in place for whatever the 1st of September is, that statementing, it's not a situation that there is, for want of a better word, statementing season, where there's a certain window each year where there's a range of things. It's actually it's a constantly moving process, and children will be identified. There will probably be somebody out there today who will be identified who previously hadn't been identified as somebody who's starting the statementing process today. So consequently, I understand that, as I said, at least 50 children at present are currently in process, and consequently they will not have been allocated a direct place in a special school. In part of that is because, again, as everybody around the table is aware, out there's sometimes a particular perception of children with special needs of having a single fixed point of what that child looks like in terms of their needs. There will be a vast range of needs And for instance, particularly as regards, even the point of view of statementing as regards placements, for some children, the most appropriate place for that child in terms of their the issues that they face will actually be in a mainstream school, be it at nursery level or indeed that. In other cases, it will be directly in a special school. So if somebody's going through the statementing process, I think it's very difficult to kind of prejudge what the outcome of that will be, to say you're automatic. So there are children that are currently in transit, and in terms of the process on it now, we're not aware directly of children who were previously
and as we mentioned before the Minister joined us, I mean, the EA does have an early years SEND service, so there are supports and advice available for the mainstream settings and the PEG settings for children who do have special educational needs. So the EA will work with the parents and give advice to the parents in terms of whatever other supports. So as we mentioned, it's not that it goes from nothing to full statementing. There is the availability of services in advance of that.
Okay. Now, 5 members have indicated, starting with Chris, then Colin, Jennifer, Carla, Rosemary. Chris?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister, for your brief on this. You forgive me for feeling strongly about this, but
I would hope this would be an issue that every member would feel strongly about. If there's passion coming from yourself, then I'm very happy to.
It's fueled by the close experience of what parents of special educational needs have been put through by the process, so that's where we're coming from. In March, Minister for Education wrote that given the current level of concern, what I consider to be a lack of proper consultation with parents and schools, I now require you formally to revisit this decision you reached in June 15. That's to the Education Authority. I need you to satisfy yourself as Chair and me as Minister that there has been full and open engagement with those most directly affected by any decision on preschool provision in special schools, and that they have been listened to. You were appointed in May 2016. We're in October 2016, and yet the reality is 6 schools have had their provision reduced from full-time to part-time hours, and the review has not even properly commenced. So we also have a letter from you dated 12th of October that tells us that the EA has advised you that information relating to the actual attendance numbers in schools and the demand is not available, and yet they've provided that to us and we're able to review it today, and it seems significantly less than what they built their case on previously. So can you reassure this committee and parents of children with special educational needs that you are across the detail of this issue and that you are impressing on the Education Authority to get on with this process and to properly engage with parents and principals on the issue?
From that point of view, that's why we've met with them, why we've met with the relatively early on with the Chair and the Chief Executive in relation to this, why particular processes have been produced in relation to this. Now, the important issue, look, I can appreciate for any individual parent, it will be the impact on their child whenever it's hitting in that particular year. I think the importance, particularly of the strategic review, was actually to try and put in place something which could actually be a very sensible strategic position, which actually would ensure that as we move ahead, the position on that basis would be sort of fit for purpose, not just for any one particular year, but fit for purpose as we move ahead within that. I don't think from that point of view it was realistic to be in a situation that you would have a full system in place by September 2016. I think if you get a rush job in that regard, and indeed if you were to have proper consultation on anything that's produced, if you have a proper process which engages prior to that with parents, that engages with the special schools, which engages with practitioners, you know, there's an element where I can understand, it's very understandable the level of frustration that's out there. But if you're actually going to try and do this right, it will take some degree of time on that basis. Now, I suppose one of the issues in terms of making a degree of estimate, I've indicated that we have 280 that are placed directly at the moment, another 50 at the moment that are in track, but that figure is constantly varying. You know, there will be children that will be identified in October in terms of starting process. There will be those, you know, so it is movement in that regard. There has to be a degree of estimation made of that, because it is ultimately the identification a degree of analysis that will come from the health side in that regard. So, you know, it can't be, say, with absolute certainty how many children there will be there. There can be a level of estimate that are made in connection with that. And therefore, I think that actions were taken to try and adjust that. Now, the other factor as well with this is, if we were simply dealing with a situation in which, for instance, the level of growth in terms of numbers was something that was simply of a uniform nature across Northern Ireland, you'll find actually that some of the pressures will be localised in that regard. And I think particularly, if possible, for special needs special children with statements who need a special needs nursery place, it should be placed as close to home as possible as well. It is also the case that in terms of the nature of the statements that are coming out will also vary in relation to that. So it's not just you know, numbers are an overall important bit, but it's there's a complex bit beneath that in terms of a pressure from a geographical point of view and a pressure from a point of view of the type of the nature of the needs. And indeed, you know, for example, there can also be a situation that some children who would have needed a particular place in a special needs nursery, and maybe the most appropriate for them 10 years ago, may, in terms of their needs, actually the interpretation might end up being actually a mainstream school now. Not particularly true. I think there's been a change in position and attitudes, even particularly parents, when it comes particularly to physical disabilities in particular in that regard. So some of the pressures have been on, particularly around issues of mental disabilities, around autism, around those type of issues.
Okay, Chair. We're 7 months after the review was directed by the Minister for Education, and the review, I believe, is scheduled to start, or the consultation period is scheduled to start on the 24th of October for only 7 weeks. Can you tell us if the Parents for Equal Education Coalition have been invited in writing to participate in the parental review group? Have all special educational needs nursery principals been invited and notified of the opportunity in writing to participate in the principals group? And has a project manager been appointed?
Okay, in relation to, I just need to check on the project manager. The EA is signing off on an engagement strategy ahead of that, which will then be made available to the committee as well. Directly speaking, in terms of that engagement strategy, will involve direct consultation at that. And don't forget, this is a pre-consultation stage. This is ahead of the draft bit. There's effectively, from that point of view, it will be 2 clear bites at the cherry for everyone on the basis that you'll have a pre-consultation period prior to the then public production of a draft report, and then a full public consultation after that. But very specifically, you mentioned about the, in terms of the parents group, the Parents for Equal Coalition. And my understanding is, yes, they will be, for institutions, they will be one of the groups specifically targeted as part of this 7-week consultation and be invited. Similarly, in terms of the special...
and ask, will they, have they been?
Well, sorry, the engagement strategy is being signed off by the EA board.
Which is starting in 12 days?
Yeah, and they'll sign off the engagement strategy, which will include, I understand, the arrangements for that. That will be made available. But very specifically, I understand, as part of those engagement bits, listed within that engagement strategy will be directly a commitment in terms of the Parents for Equal Education Coalition. It will include all the principals of the special schools, indeed as the group that's been mentioned. Specifically as regards to the project...
Have all principals been invited to participate in that? We've been told previously by the Education Authority that all principals will be included, and when questioned, it's transpired that 1 or 2 principals are even actually aware of it. So will all principals be notified in writing about that opportunity?
Yes, well, they will all be...
Sorry, my question was, have they?
But sorry, the engagement strategy itself is being signed off by the board. It will, as part of that engagement strategy, invite them. So there's a sequence of events on that basis on it, and the invitation will then come from...
Which starts in 12 days and lasts for only 7 weeks, and this is meant to be meaningful consultation. So do you not think by this stage all principals should have been fully informed?
With respect, Chris, we're in a position where one complaint seems to be that this wasn't fully in place for September 2016, and then simultaneously we're being told that the time frame is too short for consultation. Now,
no, I'm asking about invitation and notification and inclusion. And
one complaint can be made or the other, but I don't see logically how both positions are a thing.
So
there will be.
They haven't been.
They will be,
right,
in that regard,
okay.
Because that will flow from the thing. And don't forget, there will be the two opportunities, because there will be very specific, on the basis of that, the groups will be very specifically consulted as part of this pre-consultation, and then when the EA produce a draft report, there will then be full public consultation for 8 weeks, leading to changes potentially then for a full bit. Now, I just need to check in terms of, you mentioned the project manager.
Yes, the project manager has been appointed, and we've already had meetings. Obviously, the Minister indicated that he had asked his officials to particularly monitor progress. So we have established monthly meetings with the project manager and Dr Mangan to get regular updates on progress. Obviously, that you'll see that the EA have also established their own subgroup and also their own project board who will be driving forward the review.
Chair, in closing that to be constructive, I think it would be helpful to check or require the Education Authority to properly notify everyone who is meant to be meaningfully consulted in the pre-consultative stage
and
that they are done.
I think that would be clear. I mean, my understanding on it is that as soon as they have signed off directly on the engagement strategy, it will happen in a few days in that regard.
It'll then be implemented.
It'll then be implemented, but also in addition to that, the full detail of that engagement strategy will also be made available to the committee at that stage. So therefore, while we are doing a degree of monitoring of what is there, there will also be the opportunity on that basis in terms of the engagement strategy for the committee to ensure that there's that proper monitoring as well.
I think it is really important, but I do detect ministerial and departmental will to make sure that does happen, that those people are correctly involved.
I mean, look, there's no point in going through any of this exercise to get it wrong on that basis. And I think it's important that this actually sketches out not simply what is going to happen in 17-18, but a longer term strategic position on that basis. Now, I can't prejudge the outcome in that regard, but if it's simply going to be something which is a short term fix, then it's not actually going to be worthwhile to anybody.
I need to go to Colin now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming to the committee today. I suppose maybe just the first thing is I'd say this to yourself as I would say to any other minister and at any point in time, so it's not a personal thing, but certainly
that always gets somebody worried.
A good start to the line.
Colin, you can say you're very welcome, Minister, but then it's all downhill.
And I smiled as well. It was doing well. No, but it's in terms of the Education Authority. I detected in your earlier remarks maybe a sense of saying they're down there, they're making their decisions, they're doing what they do. And I have detected a similar vein from other ministers with regard to bodies that are within their department. And the bottom line is that I certainly, and I think a lot of the public, accept that you're in charge of education in this area. The Education Authority carry out the policy, but at the end of the day, the buck stops for yourself, and you're the person that, through your department, that sets that. And I don't want it to become a case of if the Education Authority aren't doing what they're doing, that it's them, that they do what they do. So it's just, I don't...
No, I understand. I mean, Colin, just I suppose in relation to that, I suppose I could say that if something turns out to be done outstandingly well and a great result by the EA, I'll claim the credit, and if it all goes badly wrong, I'll take the blame. But being serious on this, actually, look, yes, you're right in terms of the buck ultimately stops with any minister in relation to that. The only point I would make directly in relation to this, and indeed other issues, the EA, I suppose, is in a slightly different position. It is directly a creature of statute. It does have particular legal responsibilities. We can monitor, we can meet, we can urge them to take particular things, we can pressurise them in terms of particular things on it, but there will be very specifically, and I suppose particularly in education, there are particular lines of demarcation which at times legally can't simply be overridden. In the same way, I suppose, if you take it at a different level, there will be at times particular decisions that are taken within schools that are the legal responsibility of a Board of Governors. And whatever the view of EA or CCMS or myself or the department will lie directly with that Board of Governors for particular decisions. So that you know, from that point of view, it is important that people realise where the lines of responsibility lie. But I take the general point that you make.
It's much easier just to blame you. Not that we would do that. But in terms of the consultation, I'll just as a mark for the record, I probably don't have a particular faith, and as a great cynic, I don't have faith in a lot of government consultations because I think they already know the outcome that they're looking for whenever they enter into the process. And we have already seen what the Education Authority were trying to implement in this case, and they're now going to consultation. And I'm not a famously betting man, but I would say there's not going to be a vast difference between what comes out at the end of the consultation and what they were trying to sell to us earlier in the year. But we'll have to wait until we go through that process to see it. But with the number of hours that are offered to children in differences across the whole of the North, and the fact that the EA approach seems to be to dumb down the level so that everybody gets the same amount but it's a lesser amount, does that ultimately mean, Minister, that you're failing those children that are getting the extra hours, and is it fair to fail them from what they need?
Well, I think it should always be needs driven in relation to this. Look, I mean, I appreciate people will always be slightly cynical about consultations. However, I think it's wrong to, even if we're at the stage, actually at a pre-consultation stage, where before even a draft has been produced in relation to that. I mean, I would indicate that where you get, for instance, in terms of the reduction of hours, it also then will lead to similarly a level of change in terms of the pupil-teacher ratios in that regard. So those who will tend to get shorter hours will then have a better pupil, in terms of on that side of things. So there is a slight degree of trade-off in that regard. I mean, we are in a situation in terms of geographically, as I indicated, part of the thing, and particularly if you're looking at a short-term solution within that, the level of pressures in terms of numbers vary geographically in that regard. Now, as with everything in education, if you were essentially simply to take, shall we say, all the pieces off the board, very easily rearrange them so that they completely matched what was there in terms of numbers, that would be something which would be advantageous, but not something that's doable. I would point out in terms of the broader provision of special needs education, which is something that it will probably be published within the next week or so. The EI board is also going to be producing a draft area plan for all of Northern Ireland as regards all schools, and within that area plan is a specific section, again starting a debate on where we are with special needs schools. Now, I don't want to preempt that because that will be published relatively soon in connection with that. That also feeds into the area of area planning. From the point of view, I think it's important that children get as much as possible within what is doable, what is in their best interest and what they need. And whether it is on the basis of children in special needs education, the need of a child in special needs education is not identical from child to child. So I think that will be something that will have to be borne in mind in relation to it. And for some children, for example, some children may well, and I'm careful here because I don't want to stray too much into the remit that we'll have to look at that. For some children, they may well be very well and best, their needs may be best met where they are getting 5 hours or getting a full bit. For some other children, a full-time place in terms of for the full day may actually be not in their interest, because it may mean that actually that child is simply getting worn out, getting, etc., etc. So it's not necessarily, and I think that's something we'll have to be looked at in the review. I don't want to prejudge any outcome in relation to that. And I suppose if you take a look at the pattern of delivery of preschool provision has been to try and make sure, in terms of matching at least geographically things, that there is some level of preschool provision for every child in Northern Ireland. We have, while there's some people who drop out of the process, in terms of overall placements, there's been 99.9% this year, but that is a mixture, I think about 62% across the board that's part-time provision, 38% that would be full-time provision. So from that point of view, there is a degree of mix within that.
Okay. Can I ask members to be succinct in the...
I'll try and be... I'm trying to be as...
And the Minister as well.
Yeah,
apart from that, you're keeping well.
Yes.
Okay.
If you could manage that, Barry, you may possibly get a Nobel Prize.
I know it'll be going well. But could I be so cheeky as to suggest that Jennifer and Carla maybe ask their questions together, then that Rosemary and Sandra do the same, and then conclude with David, because before 12:30 we want to reach the other subject as well. You're leaving at 12:30, is that?
I do, yeah, there's an appointment which
so otherwise
I don't have any.
We won't be able to cover the two topics. So Jennifer and Carla, if you ask yours first.
Okay.
Jennifer.
Okay, very welcome, Minister. I just want to follow on from a couple of points that have already been made, and they touched a bit on it with Caroline's session earlier. I know you mentioned it, and obviously the review, the SEN review, is something to be welcomed, and because we've all had experience of parents and the length of time, particularly waiting on statements and access and services and everything else. I think that but in terms of the particular issue of special needs provision in special needs schools, nursery provision, we've all, all of us have witnessed, the absolute distraught parents that have come in, and obviously children with very complex needs. It's hard enough and difficult enough for parents dealing on a day-to-day basis, but for them to be told then that their hours have been cut in their nursery provision, or being told there's no nursery provision there, that actually adds to the child's distress and obviously their distress as well. And I know you mentioned short-term fixes, but just given that we're now hearing from the Education Authority that the problem maybe wasn't as acute as they thought in terms of not having places in particular schools, and I know this won't help in all cases because children have to be near where their homes are and everything else. But is there nothing that could be done, given that it's going to be another year before some of these children are placed in nursery, and some might not even get to the nursery provision? Could there not be something done now to ensure that that the child that needs, particularly the child that has complex special needs, that needs this this provision, that they can actually access it now? That I think that they're saying now that there's schools that are undersubscribed, that they thought would have been oversubscribed, and what I'm hearing, and I brought up in the previous session, for instance, a woman who has been told her child could have went to the school, had a place in the school, and could get the statement processed while the child was in the school, has now been told that isn't the case. And I know from what Caroline said and what you said earlier, there are special circumstances where that can be the case. Can there be something looked at and flexibility given in terms of this now? The children who have those, who have to have that access to special needs schools provision, can we look at it again? Can the Education Authority now, given, in my opinion, the debacle that they caused in all of this, can something be done now? I know we don't want a short-term fix for the issue in the wider capacity, but can there be something done now for these parents and these children specifically, now that we're hearing that there are actual places available? I know you're saying there's in-year provision needs to be looked at, but a child that has been born with particular complex needs, you're always going to know that child's going to need to go to a special needs school. So it's not something that is going to happen, So therefore, can we look now and see where parents that had tried to access that provision and were unable to do it and had their hours reduced and everything else? Can we look at some sort of flexibility to do that?
And Carla's question as well.
Yeah, thank you. And can I thank the Minister for coming along? I think it has actually been very, very positive what you've been able to bring to the committee today. I think you have very clearly demonstrated your commitment to children with special needs, and I know Caroline got a rough ride earlier, but I do believe, listening to the comments this morning, that there is a desire from the department side to really, really tackle this problem. I think our colleagues across the way, Chris, gets very exercised about the notification of stakeholders, and to be honest, I would be saying to him to come forward with some constructive ways of dealing with it as well. Especially whenever you have said very clearly that these people will be invited and you will make sure of that. You talked about forward planning, and I think that is potentially where the whole thing seemed to fall down, and I think that is a key. Can you maybe explain just how you actually intend to forward plan and how you're actually tackling that disconnect between health and education? Is there, will the project manager deal with that side of things, or is there a group or a ministerial group that looks at that. Jennifer made the point around these children, particularly who go to special needs schools, when they're born or in their very first years, it's very, very evident that they're going to need that type of care. So, you know, what is being done just between the disconnect?
Okay, just answer those bit quickly then. I think certainly we could liaise with the EA in terms of places. It's not always as straightforward as that. In part, you mentioned legally the placement can happen in a special needs school unless it is shown to be exceptional circumstances. The placement has to be off the back of a statement in that regard, which limits the level of flexibility that's there. However, I would also indicate that where there are cases of that nature, there is an early years support service which is also there from the EA to provide some level of bridge within that. Again, we'll be happy to look if there's anything to be done around flexibility of places if it becomes clear that there are going to be some vacancies in relation to that. Again, where the thing, I suppose, can become a little bit difficult is, you mentioned, obviously rightly, Jennifer, about the some children with complex needs. Sorry, excuse me. It can also be that you get two children with complex needs, but actually what is needed to be provided for them will be completely different. And so you may find, and again, I'm taking this probably a little bit more than hypothetical in that regard, you may find that for one child with very complex needs, that what actually is best suited for them is actually a relatively short period of the day where they're in nursery, and it may be for another child in terms of their complex needs that actually a longer period is more suitable for them. So it's not just as straightforward as that. And I suppose where the statementing process, where it does become difficult in that regard, the statementing process will identify those individual needs. I suppose if you're then trying to put some form of regulations in place, defining where the defining line of particular children with particular complex needs fall into one category and where the dividing line between that and others who will have other special needs. I certainly will be happy to work with the EA to see if there's any additional flexibility as regards that.
And also, Minister, you may receive individual representations from members.
I understand that, and we will try and liaise with the EA, because again, the department can't place an individual child, but we can certainly raise that issue directly with that. To pick up Carla's point, in terms of, yes, I think in terms of forward plan, is actually to try and get something that's a little bit more strategic in its nature. That will mean that it should be sort of future year proofed as much as possible. Specifically in terms of the liaison arising out of some of the legislation that went through in special needs and also the children's cooperation side of it, there is a greater level of cooperation that is happening with health. In certain regards, probably there may be an argument that the byproduct of a greater level of cooperation is much earlier identification, and where that then can create problems sometimes with placements is that instead of the issue being a child being in transit, if you like, in terms of a statement during their primary school years, some of that's now hitting in terms of the nursery, but so it is, in certain regards, also has helped shift the problem, but very specifically, there's very direct Department of Health and health practitioner involvement within this process. There are directly health practitioners and specialists that will be on the project board, so they'll be at that level. They'll also be involved at, I mentioned about there will be a consultation group of practitioners, and that also I think will involve people from the health side of it as well. So the health will be at each of those elements within that.
I think that's actually very encouraging to hear that, because that's one of the biggest issues about the disconnect. The other very, very quick point I would make is it is for us as a committee quite difficult whenever you hear parents talk about their child, how a part-time place just would not suit their child. By the time they get them up and get them ready and get them to the school, and then it's literally time to go home, and all their feeding and all of that there. So I think again, very much parent-centred, and I just want you to commit.
And again, I think that's important. And I would have used if I was sitting on the project board where I would see the direction, but I think obviously they've got to produce their own report, so it's maybe wrong to prejudge.
Okay, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take Rosemary and Sandra together. Rosemary?
I've just one question, because you've answered some of them, and that is, it's in relation to forward planning. Now, I was reading up on the ETI Chief Inspector's report in 2014. They talk about an inconsistency in preschool provision across the province. Now, coming from the West, Are you going to ensure that there will be a consistency across the province on preschool education, special education provision for everybody?
Back you on that, Rosemary. Anytime you mention west of the Ban, I back you instinctively. Okay, Sandra?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Minister, for coming this morning. The points have been well made with regard to this particular subject. Indeed, the Minister shouldn't feel intimidated by the questions coming from the committee, so much so that his party colleague rises to support him and admire his dedication and commitment, because I'm not afraid to say that as well whenever the Minister deserves it. The role...
I welcome your support, Sandra.
But, the role of the committee is obviously to scrutinise the Minister and his work in his department, and we welcome the opportunity to do that. My simple question really is to those... There's a special school in my particular area who had been moved to part-time hours some time ago. So, further to this review, will there be an opportunity for schools such as that to increase back up to full-time provision, if that is the case?
Very quickly take that. I mean, yes, it'll up to the review in terms of, that can be variations on, presumably on timing, which it could go one of two ways in that regard, or indeed a mixed economy on that basis. So I wouldn't prejudge what could come out of that, and I think that is not something which is precluded from the review. To take on board, I think, Rosemary's point earlier, to some extent in terms of the difference of provision, is largely speaking through historic situations that if you take a look, for instance, in terms of the provision of special schools, you wouldn't necessarily have all the special schools where they are today if you were starting from a blank page. I suppose, to be fair, that's also the same with the schools estate in general. Where probably in terms of some of the differences of action have been over the years have arisen from the fact, I think, particularly that you've had 5 education and library boards, and part of this is try to pull this together in a much more consistent way. I know even going back about 11 years to whenever I was briefly on the South East Education and Library Board, the level of statementing with the South Eastern Education Board, I think because of particular diagnostic issues within Lisburn and Down, for instance, at a much greater level than any of the other boards. So there will have been that sort of historic inconsistency. Part of the aim of this review is to deal with that. But very specifically, I think, and you'll see this whenever the area planning report comes out, probably next week, in terms of the special school provision, is to try to provide a greater level of consistency across the board. And so, for example, I think one of the areas will be that most special schools will provide 3 to 19 provision, but there's a number that don't necessarily provide preschool. There's a number of, if you like, the cut-off point then would be at a lower level in terms of age, and part of that will try to get consistency across schools within that. Now, there may be a limited amount I can say directly about individual schools, because that would still have to come as a direct development proposal to me, which legally I have to sign off on. But I think that is the thrust of trying to provide consistency with the area planning side of it. But there'll be, just about your appetite, there'll be more detail whenever that emerges.
Thanks.
And if either wants a chance to come back now, just...
That's great.
Happy enough, Sandra?
Yes,
Happy
thank
enough,
you.
Rosemary? Thank you. David, finally?
Thanks, Chair, and welcome, Minister, this morning. I think it's been very useful indeed to allay some of the concerns that members have been raising here, and particularly welcome the shortened consultation. It's such an important issue, people will be in there anyway to get in early on the consultation, so that's useful to shorten the time. Just looking to the future and where we're reacting to the situation at the moment. Moving forward, had some questions about geographical areas have been answered, but factors affecting demand, basically, is it due to improved or better detection, or is the department looking at that?
I think there's a range of factors. Some of it is earlier detection, sometimes it's better detection. I think some of the stuff that can create geographical, but again, this has been historic, is depending upon who is doing the identification, particularly from the medical side, you may also sometimes get a situation where you get different attitudes, different approaches taken by different doctors with different diagnoses. I mean, I mentioned that particularly going back over a decade, there was a particular viewpoint taken within the Down Lisburn Trust as it was then, which meant that the figures for that area were massively more spiked compared to other areas. So a combination of that. I think in terms of there's also different attitudes in terms of particular provision and where people see themselves in terms of inclusion within. There's been a greater degree of shift in terms of identification, particularly of particular needs on the mental side of things on it. There's been a tendency where there's been a shift a bit towards on the physical side of it, of more parents, I think, wanting to see perhaps their child within mainstream school inclusion. And again, some of those things are shifting. And one of the other, I suppose, aspects, which is something that we should all be very thankful for in that regard, is that compared over time, there are some children with maybe severe disabilities that 20, 30 years ago, from a medical point of view, would not have survived to school age or would have died, are thankfully actually living, some of them actually long and very full lives, and certainly some of them living a lot longer. And that is something that I think all of us should welcome. But obviously then it's a knock-on effect in terms of the levels of demand and supply within the system as well.
Okay, thank you. And members probably have around 20 minutes for this next item. We're moving to questions now relating to post-primary transfer policy, and I have a number of members have indicated. Before I go to Chris, Colin, Jennifer, Sandra, before I do that, I just want to say that I think everybody knows that political differences are well rehearsed and well understood, and my position's known and your position's known, and that's the way it is. But can I ask you, Minister, do you intend to reintroduce a single regulated transfer test aligned with the revised curriculum to be taken by primary school pupils in order to secure admission to a selective school? Is that your intention?
My intention, I would like to see a single test. In an ideal world, I would like to see a single test that was agreed by government in that regard. I'm realistic enough to know that there won't be agreement politically over that. And so consequently, I'm not going to waste time trying to find a state test and get agreement across the different views that are there on that basis on it. I'm also not going to try and impose a single test, a single state test in that regard, because I also think that people need some level of certainty moving forward as well. I think on that basis, at the moment, there are two tests or two sets of tests which are produced by two separate organisations. I think the more realistic way is, and I think the complaint sometimes some parents will have will be over the volume of tests, and particularly I think there's approximately about 2,000 pupils who actually sit both sets of tests. I mean, in most cases, potential pupils will sit one or the other, but there's a degree of overlap, and some of that can be geographical in that regard. I think on that basis, that if it's not to be something then to impose by the state, then there's got to be agreement between the two organisations. That's what I'm starting in a process to see, and it may or may not ultimately produce any results, but I want at least to give that a try. So from that point of view, there won't be a single state test, because I don't think there'll be something that could be politically agreed in that regard. And you know, never mind about 12:30, you could lock the door until in this room until Christmas, and there won't, I suspect, be a meeting of minds. I'm realistic enough to realise that. And put it this way, I have enough problems in education without seeking another trench warfare on something else, which there isn't going to be an automatic solution to.
Okay, and can I just ask the Minister knows that our party, for example, is opposed to academic selection, as are others, but has the Minister and his department, have you commissioned research or gathered data on the costs for parents associated with preparing for these either unregulated or regulated transfer tests, including the inaccessibility of private tutoring?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, in the broader level in terms of costs, there's obviously a differentiation. If you take a look at the two sets of organisations that provide it, one essentially provides it free and the other provides it for a fee, that will be part of presumably the discussions between the two organisations, so how that will be there. In terms of the private tutoring side of it, as part of the guidance that I issued to schools was essentially permissive in its nature, but I suppose part of that was looking towards the issue of private tutoring, that if we move away from a situation where there is officially a ban on schools doing this, and at least what is at times in certain schools probably happening behind closed doors already, is at least then and openly and honestly and therefore could be provided by schools, that at least reduces some of the pressure and need for private tuition. Now, within any education system, whether we like it or not, there will always be levels of private tuition, whether that's on the basis of transfer test, or it will also be a case that if you move to examinations at later stages, GCSE or A levels, there will be parents, particularly who will have resources available, will want to put that, who will actually get private tuition for their child at whatever level. And that can't be stopped, it can't be banned in that regard. I think the more that there's the opportunity for certain things to be done within school, the more you negate some of the need for that, at least lessen that degree of pressure.
Okay. Chris, followed by Colin. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Okay. I accept that some parents, some teachers regarded the decision to endorse, formalise the use of the 2 unregulated private tests for transfer for 10 and 11-year-olds as providing some degree of clarity. I have made it clear I think it's flawed, and I think the way in which you went about it with a failure to engage with the Executive Assembly or this committee was flawed and shows a degree of contempt for the people that we represent. I'm interested, however, to get to an evidence-based discussion on this issue. I'm aware that OFM DFM commissioned a significant piece of research called Investigating Links in Achievement and Deprivation. It started in March 2012, finished in March 2015. Shorthand for it is the Iliad report. I understand as OFM DFM been in possession of the report for over a year. Have you had access to that report?
Well, that report is an OFM DFM report. It's a matter for them in relation to that. And I think sometimes opponents of selection, I think, have jumped on one particular line within that report. Now, you ask about the evidence base. The evidence base I see in Northern Ireland is... Well, if you ask me a question, let me answer it, please.
Well, my question was, have you seen the report?
From that point of view, I don't recall seeing the report. It's really an OFM DFM report.
Okay.
But
Chair, we're asking the questions.
Well,
in fairness.
yeah,
it
may be useful though if you ask me a question. Because you asked me 2 or 3 questions there.
My first question is, have you seen the report?
No, sorry, you didn't. You asked.
That's my question.
Well, with respect on it, you also asked about was there an evidence base in relation to the issue on it.
Discuss the evidence.
Can you just give the Minister an opportunity to reply to your 3 questions? If you could just give the Minister...
My only question is, have you seen the report?
You asked about the process in relation to this. Guidance has been issued, and guidance is issued.
Ask about the process.
Chris, don't interrupt the Minister while he's speaking.
Well, okay, but
we have a very short time.
I know, we can do this
if you're going to
interrogative.
make particular comments, you've got to give me some degree of opportunity to answer back on those comments.
I have a number of questions that are going to give you an opportunity to respond. At this point, I'm just asking, have you seen the report?
Indicated in terms of process, the guidance has been issued each year in relation to that. On it, you mentioned about that process. I thought it was important to get this out to schools in connection with it. And the guidance is of the word. It is guidance. It is permissive towards that. In terms of the evidence based on it, I would evidence the fact that both. First of all, there is a desire that is there for academic selection. Irrespective of whether you're pro-academic selection or against it, there's a clear desire out there, and this is about trying to provide sensible routes within this. In terms of evidence of success, the fact that our examination results for year after year have outstripped everywhere else in the UK shows that there is at least some degree of correlation between that and the level of success. And also, as part of that is, I evidence the fact that the choice in other places where there isn't academic selection is much more, mention has been made, which is a difficulty within the system of private tuition. The choice elsewhere is actually between those who can afford to pay for private schools and those who can't.
Okay.
And I think from that point of view, I believe that our system is a preferable system.
Have you requested access to the report?
No, look, from that point of view, in terms of, I'm working on a range of stuff as regards the issue. I mean, it's a report from OFM DFM. I'm working on a range of stuff and working with a range of organisations in terms of particularly tackling underachievement. I think that a lot of that has got to be focused in on early years. And I have to say, I think some of the issues as regards particular social deprivation and underachievement, there is also an element of transfer at 11. While it's important that any form of transfer is made as smooth for people, and I think, therefore, for instance, I made reference in the House yesterday to ongoing work and things. Okay. If you're actually going to be tackling some of those issues, then it's got to be actually the earlier intervention. If essentially things are left to 11, then I don't think we're...
Okay, so this report, Chair, is a 3-year study conducted by 10 experts from Queen's University and Stranmillis University College in relation to the effects of deprivation and education achievement, and the Minister has not requested access to this report.
It's not my report.
According to a BBC article, among its recommendations is the ending of the current system of academic selection as a key way to reverse educational
I don't accept. I have to say, I don't accept that.
Appreciate that, but I'm raising the issues with you. The report also says that the current system is high on excellence and low on equity. and the access to the best education is too often determined by socio-economic status. The current system significantly favours those with positive family norms around education, successful parents, financial capacity. So you haven't requested the report, and you're, despite it being a 3-year study by 10 experts from Queen's University and Stranraer University College, are dismissing it out of hand.
Well, I'm glad to see at least the Alliance Party has clarified its position on the abolition of grammar schools, which is clearly what you're intending.
Okay, we're going to have to go to Colin now. Colin.
Oh, nonsense, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I suppose two very quick questions. The first one is, Minister, did you not deem the decision that you took to be sufficiently controversial that it required executive approval, and rather than taking the decision yourself, and that clause that's there, that controversial decisions must be run past the whole?
Because in that sense, it wasn't a decision. This was guidance that was issued. This is about, and guidance that has been issued in different formats every single year to schools. I'm not aware on any previous occasion of any of the guidance. Now, guidance by its nature can either be, I suppose from that point of view, Colin, I could give you guidance whether you want to take it or not. Would be another moot matter in that regard. It is about being permissive in that regard. You might say it's about as close as the DUP is ever going to get to the permissive society in that regard, but it is about actually trusting schools to make their own decisions in that regard. So it is guidance. So therefore, it didn't require executive approval, as indeed, albeit the guidance was different, that was issued by previous ministers, well, didn't require executive approval. So I'm following the precedent of that. It's something that lies entirely within the department. If it was something that was being imposed on people to have a particular change that had to happen, then I think that would be a different kettle of fish. But this is about guidance and advice.
Okay. And given that the evidence shows that those that pass the exam do well, and those that fail the exam don't do as well, by supporting this exam and perpetuating selection, are you letting children down, those that you deem failures?
Sorry, I don't deem them failures. Those are your words, Colin, rather than mine in that regard. I think we have a system where we have a very good range of schools that are both selective and non-selective, and overall Northern Ireland has had the best overall results. That is not simply saying that the grammar schools have had the best results in Northern Ireland. It is actually saying the overall system has produced the best results. And there are a range of educational options that are out there. As I said, the purpose of this guidance is also simply recognising the reality of the situation of academic selection is there, and irrespective of what people's views on it, it is clear that it is there to stay. There is a clear demand for it on that basis. And this is about actually giving a level of permission to schools to be able to say, look, you are free to make your own decisions in terms of the preparation that takes place. If a school wants to say, we do not believe in academic selection, we will do nothing at all to prepare our pupils for that, then that is entirely a choice for that school, for those governors to make in that regard. I'm not compelling them to do anything.
Minister, I think educational attainment levels are rising in non-selective schools. Is it fair to say that they're doing the heavy lifting, given the percentage of free school meals, special education needs pupils who they teach?
Well, you'll find, special education needs schools are not simply confined to non-selective schools. You'll find that within the sector. I think a lot of people within the education system are doing a lot of heavy lifting in that regard, so I wouldn't want to categorise where the heavy lifting is coming from, where it isn't.
Jennifer?
Yeah, maybe as quick as I can. Obviously, you know, I have a chair with Barry's opening remarks in terms of we have a totally different approach to this in terms of academic selection. But just specifically in and around the guidance, and you mentioned there about a clear demand or a desire from parents, and I think, the Bishop, when he was here, actually clarified that, and that is that unless you do a certain test, you can't get into a particular school, which, that is why some of the parents are actually, and I know parents who are actually, at turmoil because they want, their particular child to go to a particular school. So I don't think that the demand and the desire is more to do with it's there at the moment, and that's the process they have to do. But see, just Minister, because you mentioned, and I've heard you mention it before, but you mentioned in here specifically today in relation to this issue that every child should have access to the best education opportunities possible. And then, and I'm not going into, because Chris has already went into the report that says it, but I want to concentrate on particularly the link with deprivation and academic attainment, and particularly, all the evidence that is there, all the reports. I'm not going to go into quote them school principals, parents. We have heard it time and time again, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, the Children's Commissioner, you know, that the gap between those who are deprived and disadvantaged and those select few that academic selection sort of helps is just so wide. And I have to say, you know, in terms of your position in changing the guidance, you know, all that evidence is there, all that sort of policy from your own department. So where did you base your decision on? What evidence did you base your decision on? And what policy in your department did you base it on to actually change it?
The position on it is I've made it very clear from day one that I'm supportive of academic selection on that basis. But this, as I said, first of all, is permissive in its nature. It is about allowing schools to take their own choice in that regard. And, you know, I think for years we had the situation of a certain level of phony war over this, which was that schools were told very categorically, you cannot do this. However, there was no sanction. If a school wanted to do whatever it wanted in terms of preparation, there was no sanction on doing it. So you had this sort of element where schools sometimes were pretending not to do things, but actually doing them there. And I think we're actually in a much more open situation as regards that.
Can I just,
indication, sorry, in terms of...
No,
sorry, go ahead.
I just know, because I'm conscious you have to leave and there's other people.
Okay.
Can I just ask, right, so if you're saying it's okay now for schools to do this, and I mean, you talked about the single test or whatever, and I don't know if that's in your head or whatever, but in the end of the day, are you seriously saying that it's fair, it's just, or there's no inequality in a class, a P7 class, where there are some children in that class are going to get special sort of tuition or whatever for a test, a transfer test, and there's other children that are going to be there? Are you seriously saying to me that is just, or that
I'm saying a system of academic selection is fairer than a pure selection by money, which is what happens elsewhere. Indeed, it's noticeable that as a certain debate is happening at the moment across the water, for instance, even in terms of grammar schools, and we're seeing some senior figures within Westminster who are vehemently opposing anything to do with grammar schools, who actually then sending their own kids to private education in that regard. So I say it's fair in that regard. It is actually ultimately, Jennifer, what has been happening in schools. It has not simply been admitted by some schools in that regard. It is fair, at least, that there is a degree of transparency around that.
But to give all children equality of opportunity, Minister, they all have to, in my opinion, they all have to be the entitlement framework, all those
and don't
other
forget,
things.
my guidance also indicates that there should be no diminution of the curriculum in that regard, and every child needs to be taught.
Can you ensure that's going to happen?
Yeah.
You know, sorry.
No, you're okay. I have to go to Sandra.
Thank you, Chairman, and while I welcome the statement that the Minister made to allow the primary schools to help prepare the children for the GL and AQE tests, I felt it would have been appropriate to have a ministerial statement on the issue so that we could put these questions to you on the floor of the chamber. I'm not sure if the statement was to deflect from other news that was happening on that particular day, but the Minister can answer that another time. I don't think that's really what I want to ask today, but really, does the Minister recognise that this is an issue that really he needs to take responsibility for, to progress a way forward in terms of post-primary transferring. And so is the Minister confirming today that throughout this mandate you're not willing to find a political resolution on this matter? I mean, already the Chairman raised the issue that I normally ask the question, you know, if you would bring the two private tests within the department and have one test in the meantime, and considering the way that, you know, the DUP and Sinn Féin are working within a coalition, you know, is it not something that you could come to an agreement on within this mandate, or are you giving up at this stage?
Well, it's not a question of giving up in that regard. I'm trying to be realistic in that regard, Sandra. One of the things I don't want to have a situation is, it would presumably probably be legally doable for the department in that sense to provide, or get the two organisations simply provide a single test and have it as a state test. What I don't want to have a situation is, I think there's no point in creating a situation where this becomes simply, whether there's a test or whether there isn't a test, becomes almost a political football as to who's in charge of education in that regard. And if I put something in place which, for the sake of argument, kicked in next year, and then at a future period, 3 or 4 years down the line, on that basis where there was a Sinn Féin minister, then gets abolished. You know, I don't want this kind of seesaw.
That's why you've got to get the political agreement now.
But realistically,
you know?
but realistically, Sandra, with the best will in the world, there are very diametric. You know, this is not an issue in which there's a fairly obvious meeting in the middle point, even if there wasn't. I'm absolutely committed to academic selection. I entirely respect the position of those who are clearly, and I think within this room, probably 3 of the parties are clearly fundamentally opposed to academic selection, 2 are in favour of the right of academic selection. I don't see where there's going to be a particular meeting point in relation to that on it, and I don't want to give people false hope in relation to that. Now, if I could make that process, the current process, easier, then that's something that would be the case. But you know, I'm not going to be, from that point of view, chasing something which I don't think there's any realistic prospect of getting agreement on. And I think it's important to be more upfront about that than simply pretending, well, you know, I'm going to go into the next 6 months of discussions with Sinn Féin to see if we can reach a compromise, because it is fairly obvious there won't be a compromise on that issue.
Well, if the Minister would like to continue to work behind the scenes and then let us know when he gets it resolved, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Carla?
No pressure. First of all, again, Minister, thank you for addressing this issue. I have to say at the outset there's been a couple of comments made, and I think Mr Little's handling of himself in the committee today has just demonstrated a degree of arrogance, to be quite honest, in front of the Minister. And for Colin to say those who have failed the 11 plus are failures, I would obviously be one of those failures then, because I failed the 11 plus, and I think I've done okay. And I've done okay because
I mean, maybe slightly, it sounds a bit facetious. It's almost if you don't get the 11 plus, there's a danger of you ending up as an MLA. The ultimate incentive in terms of school.
But the issue that I see is, Minister, and I suppose I'm just inviting you today to give a commitment to those young people who maybe are less academic than their counterparts. I know within my own family, my sister's very academic. I'm more vocational, more practical, and I just want you to explain to the committee your commitment to those children.
Very, very briefly, I think there's a commitment to all children. We want to provide opportunities in terms of what everybody can study on that basis on it. But very particularly, I think there is a good argument that where I think it's right, for instance, that we have within our curriculum, there's very much a skills focus, which I think differentiates us from some other regions, which, in terms of some exams, don't necessarily prepare people for the world of work to a certain extent. Where I think in terms of broader curriculum review that we need to do over the period of this bit will be to look at how we can actually boost vocational pathways for people. Not at the expense of academic, but to ensure that, and I think it's a very major piece of work.
And Rosemary?
Yeah, just one very quick question. Minister, have you given any thought to like a multi-channel transfer test, like the Dix plan? And are you going to perhaps trial that as part of the new area plans?
Well, the area plans, most directly speaking, the area plans are really on the issue of the school's estate in relation to that. Look, the Dixon plan has worked well within the broader sort of North Armagh area, and I'm committed to that. I think the problem again is it doesn't get round the issue of if you're going to move from transfer at 11 to pure transfer at 14 across the board. Even leaving,
it's more realistic age to transfer.
Well, but with respect on it, that would require even leaving else in terms of practical difficulties. First of all, I think there would still be a desire for people to have academic selection at 11, and that there is a level out there. And believe me, I suppose there are a myriad of views in that regard. I suppose sometimes they attribute a single viewpoint in that regard. There would still be a desire for transfer at 11 amongst a number of people, but also there would be a practical issue, which is if you change the school estate to suddenly transform across the bit a range of junior high schools and senior high schools across Northern Ireland on that basis on it, the extended change in the school estate realistically wouldn't be practical. Now, if the Finance Minister wants to give me a couple of £1 billion in terms of that, well, actually, if he wants to give me a couple of £1 billion, there may be better ways I can spend it in education, but I'm not necessarily holding my breath with respect.
But I think, Minister, just on that point, it is a very workable solution in that area, and I think it highlights, if there are specific ways of doing.
And I think from that point of view, I think Dixon has worked well within its area. And again, there may be an argument that if you started completely from a blank page with everything in education, there's quite a lot of things we wouldn't necessarily be at the position we're in, but I think it's also going to be practical reality. Chair, unfortunately,
Okay, Sandra might want just a final question with your indulgence, Minister.
Sorry, Minister, I couldn't let you go without asking you really with regards to the October monitoring around draft budget, etc., and the information not coming to the department or to the committee this time.
There's a wider executive position in relation to that. I can't really add any comment, but I'm really going to have.
Could you just tell us what you see the role of the committee being?
Well, with respect on it, I'm going to have to go at this stage on it. There's a wider executive position on it, and that will be the same for every minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Minister,
apologies.
If you needed a day off for being sick, who would you give the note to? Or the sick note to? Who do you?
Well, I might. Well, on that basis, I might scare the officials and say that, Barry, you're coming in to run the department for the day.
That's right. Keep taking the vitamins. Okay. Yeah. Not say tablets. Okay. Thanks very much, Minister. Good luck. Okay.
It was a bullet well dodged, Sandra. It was a bullet well dodged.
Okay. And Caroline's going to be rejoined now by Sharon and John.
You need a drink.
Okay, as I understand it.
Have you got water?
The bar's upstairs.
Okay. So next. Caroline, would you like a cup of tea or coffee? Given that you've had a very long morning.
I'll just let her go.
I'm happy with that.
Oh, if you get officials in, hold them to account.
We'll show some charity here. Do you want tea or coffee, any of you ladies?
That's very kind of you. No, I'm okay actually. I'm happy to soldier on.
Okay. So I think, Rosemary, we were with you at that point.
Chair, can I just check, are we going to do actions on all of these things?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
No, I was disappointed. Teachers are under pressure.
Yeah.
They have a variety of groups in their classrooms. Some teachers are teaching 30 pupils, 25, 30 pupils. That another professional could not be brought in, perhaps, to share the burden. Because I know teacher absences is causing concern in some schools.
Yeah, and I was obviously thinking about your point there just during the last session, and absolutely we acknowledge that, and just the volume of work and the energy that teachers have to expend in teaching pupils. I mean, what I would say is, as Jan had mentioned, while we're developing, the code of practice will be that operational level assistance to schools about how to operate the system, and obviously there is the duty to have a personal learning plan for all children on the register.
Yes,
what we will do is make sure that as least bureaucratic as possible, but equally recognising that it needs to be of value to those children and those parents. And also, I mean, I know just from my own experience, teachers do monitor the progress of all pupils in their class. Now, if there's the portion of pupils who have special educational needs, we see them being monitored in a particular way, in a particular format. We see value in that, but we'll absolutely recognise that we don't want to create bureaucratic burden, but balanced with, what is in the needs of the, best needs of the children. Also, we have enhanced through the legislation the role of the learning support coordinator, and the terms of the training, and that the boards of governors will ensure that learning support coordinator will undertake, because they are obviously a key person in that school to provide assistance and support to the teachers in the classrooms. It's certainly something we'll take back, particularly as we're developing the code of practice.
With all due respect, the learning support coordinator is a figurehead in the school, and they are not in the maths class, they're not in the English class, not in the geography class, to sit and support, because they're only timetabled for half a week perhaps to do the learn support coordination, and they teach their subject the other in the post-primary. I know that for a fact.
Well, I don't think they'd be a figurehead in every school. That's certainly not our experience at all, and that's not what we would envisage at all.
I mean, a very active figurehead, but that's their position, and they don't go into the other classrooms to assist in the teaching.
Maybe even in private dialogue, you kind of have on that one, you reach agreement.
Thank you.
Okay, Colin and Chris are the final two contributors here.
Thank you, Chairman. With the break of flow, I hope I'm not repeating maybe some of what you'd said earlier, but it really follows on from some remarks. I met a group of principals last week, and they were telling me that in the what was the old southern area, it takes 5 hours for that initial assessment from educational psychology to start the process, but yet in the southeastern area it's 10 hours, and there's even a belief within one area that 5 hours is enough, and in doing so they could double the amount that they're doing with, but just the guidelines are different. So is there provision with this and to start streamlining right across the whole of the area so that everybody, you know, that opportunity happens? And could you give me maybe some flavour of how the hours that are allocated to schools are actually divvied up? Because if I'm understanding it right, it kind of feels like, you know, the allied, another way it would be you go to a doctor and say you can work for 10 hours, but if in the 11th hour somebody needs seen tough, and it's like, rather than based on need, there's young people that actually need the assistance, let's get it to them. It's once the school's hours are complete, that's it, end of, and if you're next in the queue, it's tough, and that feels really difficult to accept.
Well, absolutely. On the first point, in terms of the difference of approach, definitely that is part of the EA's plans for regionalisation, to have that consistent approach and fairness across the region. In terms of the hours, probably we're referring to the educational psychology model. I don't know the detail of that, and I think what I'd prefer to do is write to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
I think there is a particular formula, but what I do know is that although there may be hours allocated to schools, as far as I'm aware, there also is the ability for if a child really presents and is in need, well then it's not a question of that the school will be left high and dry. But what we'll do is we'll get you greater detail on that from the Education Authority.
Thank you.
Caroline, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just don't think, Caroline, that's communicated to school.
Right. Well, I think we need to get clarity. We'll get clarity on that for you.
Definitely, teachers are saying, look, we can't get any more. So I think that needs addressed.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, I think that brings this session to a conclusion.
Okay,
I'd like to thank the team for coming along this morning. Okay.
Thank you.
That's right. Okay, and then we'll discuss members' agreed actions which follow on from both presentations.
Thanks, guys.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Hansard team as well. Okay, members, obviously Chris, you have some actions in mind, and I know Peter will try to interpret what actions we're going to take on foot of today.
So I'll have a go, Chair, and whatever I leave out or get wrong, members will keep me right, Chairperson. So in terms of the special educational needs briefing session, I think the committee's writing to the department, looking for clarification, writing to department and Education Authority, looking for clarification on the levels of educational psychology services provision, what there actually is now, for more information from the department on what process efficiencies in terms of the statementing process it's going to be bringing forward, to give more detail. I know they said something, but maybe just a detail in writing on the valid exceptions and up-to-date numbers in terms of the numbers of late statements, and also the clarification on the allocation of SEN hours to schools and the associated limitations. So in terms of that, Devil, is there more? Sorry, Sandra.
Sandra?
Thank you. You've done well there, Peter. I know you said you're asking about the levels of education psychologists, so maybe you should just ask the question if they have plans to increase that.
Yeah, Chair, you moved so comprehensively there, Peter. I may have missed, but I think you included requests for information around the amount of breaches of the 26-week target and how long those breaches were. The press, I was inaccurate. The press release was in relation to, as the officials said, the decrease of the 29 days to the 22 days for the initiation of the process further to receiving the initial referral. But the reason for that is because it's the parents who have to provide information, and caring as much as they do about this issue, they always submit it early. So that's why they're able to reduce the 29 to 22 days. There's obviously other delays in terms of health and social care trusts, etc., that seem to be the wider problems, and that's probably something for us to come back to. But if we're getting the info around the breaches, is this covering the nursery as well?
No, we'll come to that.
Come to that too. Okay. So.
Chair, on the issue of the difference between, like, the southeastern region gets 10 hours for and the southern it's 5, if there was some time scale for the change of that, because again, if it's simply from the principal's end, they're saying that an odd would change that system, but it would actually double the amount of people that they could put through the system overnight. So it might be a way to. I'd like to think that the time scale would be fairly quick on that.
Just for factual accuracy, members, that in terms of the 29 to 22 days, my understanding was that the way that the legislation was before they changed it was that the Education Authority was obliged to stop. So even if they'd got the information from the parents, they had to stop and wait for the 29 days. But the legislation was now changed so that if the parents, as you say, provide the information in time, they're able to move on. So that was just for accuracy. So in terms of the special school, preschool issue, I think this is stuff we'd asked for before, but I think we're writing to the Education Authority seeking the engagement strategy. And also perhaps seeking again an update on and to explain the changing demand, as they've given us what I would interpret as an interim picture, the 280 plus the 50. So there must be, although the Minister indicated the position will probably be rolling, but maybe there's an update we can get to see so we can compare the before with the after.
Chair, can we get this for 16-17?
Yes, that's sorry, that's in my long hand of saying yes. So that's the extract from written questions, I think, which is in members' packs, and I can't remember now the page, but
sorry,
can't
I don't
find
know
it.
either.
On. Oh, for goodness.
You know what it is though, yeah? Or people need to agree to it. So it's the Education Authority staffing and pupils in special school early years classes for 2015 to 16. I'm just asking for the 2016 to 17 version.
If members look at page 48 of my pack, I'd actually, that was from written questions, and I think one of the two members at the end of the table may have actually asked the question, so I cut and pasted and put that in. So we have the 15-16 numbers, which if you add it all up comes to 307. So what we're looking for is the 16-17 version of that. So Chair, if members are happy with that.
Agreed, members?
Yeah, I think parents are going to be pretty concerned to hear that as it stands there's only 280 children compared to 299 at the I presume at the end of the year last year who were in special school nursery places, given that the modus operandi for the reformation of the provision was pressures and demands.
Looks like it isn't the case now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Moving on to correspondence section of the meeting, and I want to refer members to pages 171.
Chair, is there actions on post-primary transfer?
Okay.
I didn't detect any, but if members have some in mind.
Can we ask what the delay is in the publication of the Iliad report?
Okay. Jennifer?
And just, I mean, I know he was sort of busy going there, but he didn't answer my question about what his position was, or what policy advice he was given, or what guidance was he using.
Can I make one other point as well, Chair? My attempt to have an answer to the question that I was asking was because of we see the Minister perhaps maybe once a quarter on a good ratio. We today was only about saying nursery and 11 plus. There are a wide range of other issues, of other issues of agenda items on our table. If ministers or officials come here and give the answer or the comments that they want to give rather than answers to the questions that we ask, it's just going to slow down the work of the committee and make the work of the committee more difficult. I had a specific question that was a yes/no answer, and I was trying my best to get to it. That is where I am coming from. I think the committee needs to take heed of when we're getting long-ranging comments from people that don't address the questions that we've asked. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
I presume we're also going to get an opportunity to come back to agreeing inquiries,
yes.
Given that one of which I've proposed is into post-primary transfer.
Yeah.
We didn't, for want of trying to get into the debate, we didn't really seem to get into it today, but I just, me personally, struggle to understand how it is possible to assess, or it's right to assess, that a 10 or 11-year-old is either academic or vocational, and struggle to see whether that's even what we're actually doing anyway, given that year 8, year 9, year 10 curriculums are the same as far as I can see in selective and non-selective schools. it does tend to descend into uncourteous exchanges at times, but that's why I think an inquiry approach would give an opportunity to actually go into the evidence and the substance of some of these issues.
Okay.
Sure, I'm not too sure about... Chris, you did ask the question, I totally agree with you there, but he did give an answer on the yes-no, there's no doubt about it. He did give a very distinctive answer, which the rest of us here heard. I don't know whether you did or not, but anyway, the answer will probably show that. But going on to the Iliad report, process-wise, are we allowed to ask OFM, DFM for that report? Are we directly, or do you have to go through the committee?
We would write to the Executive Office, as they now are, and we'd obviously copy it to the committee. But
right.
As the member won't recall, in the previous mandate, the Iliad wrote to the committee and indicated some interim findings. There was an information session which I went to on behalf of the committee, and it was near the end of the mandate. But I googled it, as the member had suggested, and it hasn't been published. To my knowledge, there are interim findings. I think something was given to the BBC as well.
Yeah. It definitely has not been published.
Has it not?
No.
So
okay, thank you.
We can write to TEO.
Okay, so agreed actions then, members?
Can we ask for the report then?
Yes, Chair. I will write to TEO. Yeah, I think we did in the last mandate, and the answer came back is it'll be published when it will be published. But I will write the question.
Is that normal? I mean, the committee's not particularly when it's relating to the other committee's scrutiny responsibilities. No, I don't know.
Jennifer, I think you could furthermore ask for the reasons for the delay in publication of the report. My understanding is that it has been under review for approximately a year.
Right.
I thought previously there was something where a committee had to go to the other committee.
I don't know. I'm not sure the protocol. You see,
we changed our protocol just to
I'm only back on committee, so I don't know what the protocol is anymore.
Okay, so actions have been agreed. Thank you, members. And I'm moving on now into correspondence section, and I'll deal with a couple of them individually. If you agree that, in a general sense, we'll treat them in a particular way. Over to you, Peter.
Sorry, Chair, I totally missed saying nursery as well on the action front there. We were asked for constructive suggestions. I think that the I think there is a reasonable level of concern over the extent to which that consultation will be meaningful. I think the committee should conduct some sort of consultation itself with parents and principals on the issue of special educational needs nursery provision.
I think
whether
we've
that's
agreed
a
that.
stakeholder event or whatever it is.
We have agreed that.
We're doing that, yeah.
You may make reference to that just in the closing stages of the meeting. But
no, Chair,
okay.
just as you said, the committee's previously agreed that the suggestion was we do it in the new year so that it would coincide with the second consultation, the second bite of the cherry. So that will give that means that stakeholders would, when they come to us with something to talk about, they'll, rather than they'll have their concerns, but by that stage the pre-consultation will be done. There should be a draft report out for consultation.
And work off that.
Talk about.
Okay.
Okay, so suppose I'll do this now, Peter, here, this bit here. A summary note on all of the correspondence is included at page 171. Are members content to dispose of the correspondence in line with the summary note? Is that agreed? If that's agreed, then I'll touch on a few issues. Item 7.2, page 175, Youth Education Provision and Centres. This is a response from the Department regarding educational provision for children and young people in the Woodlands Juvenile Justice Centre and other centres. In particular, the responses deal with Lakewood and Ivy, neither of which are juvenile justice centres but are for children with other needs and looked after children. The response sets out a dispute between the EA and the Health and Social Care Trusts at page 185. It's suggested that members hold this response and that the committee returns to it after our visit to the EA Otis setting in Woodlands at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the 26th of October. Is that agreed, members? And then seeking members' intention to attend or otherwise on the day. I certainly will attend. Okay, does any other member want to indicate their intentions to attend Woodlands at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, the 26th of October?
I don't think I'm here.
Wednesday.
Well, we can tidy this up with
I'm going to have to give my apologies that week for the meeting.
Okay. Members will be contacted. And then, moving on, item 7.8, page 213, correspondence from the Field Studies Council seeking a meeting with the committee on the benefits of outdoor learning. I want to seek members' views on this, and Peter, maybe you'll help me with this bit here.
So, Chair, the Field Studies Council, they're promoting outdoor learning. I think the predecessor committee did an event with them. They invited us to go to Derrygonnelly, and we never did. We never actually managed it. Shame on the predecessor committee for not doing that. But the suggestion is that maybe you might want to meet informally with the organisation and then maybe go out to Derrygonnelly when the weather's a bit better and we've got more light in the day later on. But the weather generally in the Northern Highlands.
Weather not the same all year round.
Come to Belfast when the weather's a bit better.
Good one, good one. But I think I would like to take a visit to Fermanagh more seriously, in the sense that if there's shared education models, Brookborough or any of that stuff, Rosemary, that you could help us understand, what a good working day in Fermanagh would look like. But this might be part of it. Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed, members.
Agreed.
And then moving on. I just ask members if there are any other items of correspondence or news releases or publications that you wish to discuss, and if you don't. Forward Work Programme. I'm referring members to the draft Forward Work Programme at page 281. The Department has asked if the Children and Young People Strategy Evidence Session can be rescheduled for the 30th of November. The strategy is to be launched in early November. It is also possible that DE might want to brief on the programme for government on the 19th of October. That being the case, are members content to reschedule other briefings? Maybe would you explain that, Peter?
So it's just, Chairperson, we're having our event probably on the 19th of October, and it may be that the programme for government departmental action plans are launched for consultation on Monday. I don't know whether they will or whether they won't, but if they were,
we could go ahead.
Well, I've said to the DALO that we'll have our event on Wednesday evening if that happens, and if officials are available, the committee would be willing to mess about with this agenda and accommodate officials, so they could come along, tell you about the programme for government. We could set you up very neatly for the stakeholder event in the evening, but that all hangs on PFG being launched, the draft department. Mental action plans being launched on Monday. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it might. So
okay.
That being the case.
That's that. Okay, agreed, members. And another thing here, an effective questioning session has been provisionally scheduled for members for the 11th of January. Can you imagine that's the other side of Christmas? It is suggested that the committee forgoes our meeting on that date in favour of undertaking that effective question and training session. Is that agreed, members? I'm going to anticipate that it's agreed. Okay,
Can
agreed.
we question that? No.
And are you content with the draft Forward Work Programme as amended? Agreed. Any other business?
Just on that, do you remember I'd raised the issue of coding?
Yes.
Did the clerk or any of the staff investigate that further?
We understand that BT are going to be launching something around coding in schools, a particular initiative, and what we're hoping to do is to align that, because I think that might be October, November time, and we're trying to align that with so that with Stromillis, so that we could help them promote this if members were willing, and visit Stromillis at the same time, engage in coding and do it that way. So we've been looking for a sort of a hook for this, a promotional event which would highlight, members' support for this important part of the curriculum.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
And if there is no other items of any other business, then the next committee meeting is scheduled for this day week, Wednesday the 19th of October, 10 o'clock in St Dominic's Grammar School, Belfast. So that's that. I do now put it that the committee adjourns.
This is the Northern